Spider-Man No Way Home delivers loads of heroes, tons of villains, and of course, like any good Marvel movie, it's packed with Easter eggs and references spanning not just Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe, but 3 Sony movie universes as well. Oh, did you not know that already? Well, what are you doing here then? This video is obviously full of spoilers. Well, now that that's out of the way, here are the 25 Easter eggs and references I thought were cool as heck in Spider-Man No Way Home. The film hits us with a big reveal fairly early on, and one I was happy to see. About a week prior to the film's release, Kevin Feige said Charlie Cox would remain the MCU's Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. But in true MCU fashion, he was vague about when, or even if, that would actually be. Well, the timing was obviously intentional, as we're treated to Charlie Cox's appearance as Murdock in Peter and Aunt May's apartment while he helps the gang out of some legal trouble. This is also hot on the heels of Vincent D'Onofrio's reappearance the same week on Disney Plus's Hawkeye series as Kingpin. Fans of Netflix's Daredevil got some good presents this holiday. Oh, and another rad thing here is that it's Jon Favreau's second time playing in a scene with Daredevil. Here, he's Happy Hogan, but he also played Foggy Nelson in the 2003 Ben Affleck Daredevil stinker. Speaking of Hawkeye, and I know this is a Spider-Man video, but we love the MCU for its connections, Yelena Belova mentions to Kate Bishop that while she's in New York, she'd like to visit the new and improved Statue of Liberty. The line is a bit strange since that Hawkeye episode aired literally one day prior to No Way Home's release, but after seeing No Way Home, it's pretty clear she was talking about the huge frickin' Captain America shield that's been added to it. Incidentally, since No Way Home takes place during the summer before Hawkeye, the statue has already been upgraded, partially destroyed, and then rebuilt in time for Yelena to go and see it. One other small but fun Hawkeye nod is that when Peter and MJ are swinging through Times Square, we see billboards for the totally accurate and not at all cringy Rogers the Musical, the very same Avengers-themed Broadway show that Clint Barton endures in the very first episode of Hawkeye. When Doctor Strange first meets the Ancient One in his first solo movie, he says he doesn't believe in souls or the astral dimension. So the Ancient One does what any abusive teacher would do and punches Strange's soul right out of his body. She later, or earlier, depending on how you look at it, uses the same trick on Bruce Banner, punching his soul out of the Hulk's body. It appears that, as usual, Strange was paying attention, as he employs this technique on Peter when he won't hand over the Machina de Cadavis magic spellbox. Why wizards don't just astral punch all their adversaries is a mystery to me, but when he uses it on Peter, it doesn't quite go as planned. Not only does Peter just, soul swim back to his body, but his body actively dodges Strange's attempts to reclaim the spellbox. My theory on that is that Peter's tingle, or spidey sense, is working reflexively. We've seen examples of a spidey sense detecting things Peter would have no way of seeing or hearing, so I guess not having a soul doesn't slow it down either. Speaking of Spidey's powers, while MJ and Peter are hiding out on the roof of their high school for some quiet time, MJ reads a tabloid article that suggests Spider-Man has the powers of hypnosis and has hypnotized MJ into joining his cult of personality. While we know Peter doesn't have that power, another spider person in the comics does. Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, can emit pheromones that make her victims fall in love with her. Fortunately for everyone else, she doesn't like using it because she considers it unethical and, as she mentions in one of her comic stories, releasing the pheromones kind of feels like going pee. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do it either. Set decorators love to hide things on sets, although for all we know it could have been director John Watts himself who planted these Easter eggs. While Peter and MJ are on their school roof, a graffiti tag that says G. Kane can be seen, likely a shout out to comics artist Jill Kane, who drew for Spider-Man at one point. Later, there's a tag on Aunt May's Feast truck that reads Ditko. The last name is Steve Ditko, comic artist and co-creator of Spider-Man, along with Stan Lee. Speaking of Stan Lee, a taxi is shown just before Doc Ock shows up with the license plate 1228, which is Stan Lee's birthday, December 28th. There's another license plate in this scene, but we'll get to that one a bit later. Now from graffiti tags to murals. When Peter Parker is speaking with his old teachers at Midtown High, he stands in front of a mural depicting some great folks from history, including Sir Isaac Newton, Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, and Mae C. Jemison, to name a few. Mae Jemison, in case you didn't know, was the first black woman in space, and additionally, the first real astronaut to appear on Star Trek, with a quick speaking part in a TNG episode from season 6. Okay. Back to the MCU. Also appearing on the mural are MCU geniuses Howard Stark and Hank Pym. Wisely, their two portraits are separated by a window, as they famously did not get along. Tony Stark's incompetent grabby robot arm, Dummy, shows up in Happy's condo. Really not sure why anyone keeps this inept robot around. It's basically a Scudder from Red Dwarf. There's an old reference for you.
I wouldn't let them open a can of beans.
But seeing him in this film makes Dummy and Happy the longest running reoccurring characters in the MCU since they both appear in Iron Man 1. They're like R2-D2 and C-3PO at this point. Anyway, maybe Happy keeps him around as a reminder of Tony. Aw, now I'm sad. Damage Control shows up again, but now they're a federal law enforcement agency that not only cleans up super people's messes, but also super people themselves, since in No Way Home, they come down pretty hard on Peter and his pals. Their function has expanded since they first appeared in Spider-Man Homecoming, where they were shown hostilely taking over all the cleanup contracts after the Battle of New York, including the one held by Adrian Toomes, who would later become the Vulture. While under arrest by Damage Control, Peter tries to name-drop Nick Fury, but Agent Cleary tells Parker that Fury has been off-planet for the last year, which is unusually forthcoming. You'd think that would be classified, but oh well. It tracks with what we saw in the Far From Home post-credits, where Fury is very busy doing Skrull stuff in preparation for the Secret Invasion series that's coming to Disney+. I mentioned the Vulture a moment ago, and there's a clever little callback to his daughter, Liz Toombs, who Peter tried to date in Spider-Man Homecoming, but had to ghost because of the whole "your dad's a villain and wants to kill me" thing. I guess she's holding a grudge, because when Strange is chasing Peter, her picture can be seen on the cover of People magazine with the quote, "He's a liar. Let it go, girl. Your dad's a bird, your boyfriend was a spider. It was never gonna work." In the mid-credits scene in Spider-Man Far From Home, we got a brief look at the MCU's version of J. Jonah Jameson, and for this incarnation, he's an internet persona with his own website, thedailybugle.net. Well, No Way Home dives in even further, and has him mirroring real-life internet conspiracy theorist Alex Jones. Jones is so out there that if you told me he was a comic book character and not a real person, I would have believed you. He's also been banned from almost every social media platform, so we're not going to give him any screen time here, but I will call out that Triple J tries to hawk his Daily Bugle supplements, the only other daily fix you need. And while it seems like a quirky little joke, it's a direct reference to Mr. Jones, who funds his platform by selling supplements with names like Alpha Power Vital Male Androgen Biosynthesis Promoter. That is not from a comic book, folks. Okay, moving on to the Spider-Men, who, to make things easier, get numbers in the film. Tom Holland's Spider-Man is Peter 1, Tobey Maguire's Spidey is Peter 2, and Andrew Garfield is Peter 3. While warming up for the big final fight, Peter 2 mentions his back is stiff, which calls back to a moment in Spider-Man 2 when Peter 2 hurts his back, which in turn is a reference to real life when a back injury reportedly almost cost Maguire his role in the first Spider-Man sequel.
My back! Oh, my back!
Sam Raimi, the director of Spider-Man 1, made the choice to have Peter 2's, this is getting weird, Peter 2's webbing be organic and come from his wrists. This is not unprecedented, as there are a few comics examples of Spider-Man that operate this way, but I always thought it was a weird choice. It's hard enough to believe that Spidey can stick to walls with his gloves and boots on, but mutating to have a spinneret in each wrist? I mean, spiders don't produce webs from their legs, you know. It comes out near their... Well, anyway, the other Peters are as confused as I am, but Peter 2 doesn't really want to talk much about it. Good for him. Let's move on. The Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man meme, using an image from the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, is sort of recreated in the high school science lab when Ned calls out for Peter's attention and all three Peters answer, and then point at each other. It's not bang on, but as we'll discuss later, it would seem that the writers are somewhat meme savvy at least, so we'll say it was an intentional reference. It's no secret that the Amazing Spider-Man films with Andrew Garfield weren't quite as beloved as the original Tobey trilogy. Well, at least the first two Tobey films. And in No Way Home, Garfield's Peter 3 is a little down on himself while preparing for the big fight. I think it's actually one of the most heartwarming scenes when Tobey's Peter 2 peps him up by telling him, well, you guessed it, that he's amazing. And honestly, I think Garfield was an amazing Spider-Man, it's just that his movies kinda sucked. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 tackles a story from the comics that no other film has taken on. Peter Parker's inability to save his girlfriend Gwen Stacy from dying. His grief is palpable when he tells Peter 1 about Gwen, and he's clearly reminded of Gwen when he sees Peter 1 and MJ interact in the high school lab. In the final battle, on the new and improved Statue of Liberty, MJ is thrown from the statue and a goblin bomb explodes. Peter 1 is unable to save her, so Peter 3 jumps to the rescue and the scene plays out almost as it did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, complete with the same audio cues. But this time, instead of Peter 3 webbing Gwen and her head hitting the ground, he catches MJ and shoots a web upwards, stopping the fall and saving her. Peter 3 finally gets the redemption moment he never really had because he didn't get a third film. I take back what I said earlier. This is the most heartwarming moment in the film. After Max Dillon, aka Electro, is defeated, he sees Peter 3's face for the first time and comments that since Spider-Man was from Queens and helps a lot of poor people, that he always assumed Spider-Man would be black. He then posits there must be a black Spider-Man somewhere. Well, we all know Miles Morales exists somewhere, and it's both black and Latinx. Spider-Man Homecoming showed us Danny Glover as Aaron Davis, the uncle of Miles, although in the film there was no official mention of Miles' existence. I guess we'll have to wait a little bit longer for that one. Let's talk villains. Moments before Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock, first appears on the bridge, we can see a license plate on the MIT Assistant Vice Chancellor's car that reads 63ASM3, which can only mean Amazing Spider-Man number 3 from 1963, the very first appearance of Dr. Octopus in the comics. It's a cool little nod, but imagine if your license plate dictated which supervillain would appear to destroy you. I'm telling you the honest truth when I say a friend of mine once, as a joke, customized his car's license plate to say Lou Bega. And now I'm trying to imagine what that battle would have looked like. Speaking of Dr. Octopus, Otto may be a scientific genius, but he's not so creative when it comes to metaphors, since he's still on about his fusion reactor from Spider-Man 2, referring to it again as the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. When he sees one of Tony Stark's miniaturized arc reactors, he says exactly the same thing, suggesting that maybe English Lit was pushed aside for his engineering studies. The Amazing Spider-Man 2's Electro was very, blue. A design choice some fans were unhappy with. In the comics, Electro is a human wearing a green suit with yellow lightning bolts and honestly a quite goofy lightning bolt mask that kinda looks like a star. It's not uncommon for films to alter costumes for the big screen so they don't look quite so, well, comical. But Smurf Electro was a big change, and it's nice to see not only Electro with a more grounded costume, but there is also a little tip of the hat to his classic comic mask. When Dr. Kirk Connors, aka the Lizard, is locked up in Strange's basement, Ned calls him a dinosaur more than once. At first I thought it was just a cute gag, but I caught a line from The Amazing Spider-Man when Police Captain George Stacy is talking on the phone to the mayor, and he says, well, I'll let you hear it.
I can assure you if there was a giant dinosaur running around the streets of Manhattan, you would be the first to know.
In the high school lab, Ned asks Peter 2 if he has a best friend. Peter 2 says he did, meaning Harry Osborn, but that Harry tried to kill him and then died in his arms. Ned is seriously distraught by this and later promises Peter 1 that he won't turn into a supervillain and try to kill him. This kind of digs into something that happens in the comics version of Ned Leeds, who sort of becomes the Hobgoblin, but was actually brainwashed and wasn't actually the Hobgoblin in the end. I really can't see this kind of thing happening to MCU Ned, but I'm ready to eat my words in a few years since there is a collection of ceremonial-looking weapons on the wall in his house, as well as some green and gold fabric shown on a sewing machine. Who knows? But I will say that Comics Ned is a totally different guy than MCU Ned. Okay, from not quite Hobgoblin to the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn gets some really good moments in this film. After battling Peter 1 on the bridge, we later see Norman ditching his mask in a dumpster in a way that honors an iconic panel from Spider-Man number 50 when Peter decides to give up being Spider-Man and ditches the Spidey suit in the same way. It's a great homage, but honestly, I'm just happy the film decided to rid the Green Goblin of his mask. I always thought it was a major misstep in the original Spider-Man films to hide Willem Dafoe's performance under a mask while he was the Goblin, and No Way Home proves me right, as Dafoe delivers some amazing performances as the unmasked Goblin. I mentioned earlier that I have to believe the writers of No Way Home know their memes, and they come through with the one line I was actually dying to hear but didn't think that I would. While locked in Doctor Strange's basement, Norman Osborn offers to help the gang cure the other villains by stating that he's something of a scientist himself. This line is taken from the first Spider-Man when Norman Osborn first meets Peter 2 and is often used to meme on someone when they are totally not a scientist.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
At the end of the film, when the universe is falling apart at the seams, just before Doctor Strange casts his final spell, there are indistinct blue glowy beings that appear to be just waiting to enter the MCU and come after Spider-Man. I took a pretty close look, and most are actually just blobs, but there is one very distinct silhouette of a person with a spear, and you gotta believe that's Kraven the Hunter, a longtime Spidey adversary who's getting his own film in 2023, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. That's a Sony film, though, in the same universe as Venom and the upcoming Morbius, so don't expect to see Kraven in the MCU anytime soon. Another silhouette looks like it has a large tail and is probably a nod to some version of the Scorpion. Spider-Man Homecoming does introduce a version of Mac Gargan, the best known Scorpion, but aside from a tattoo on his neck, this character hasn't really gone anywhere. Sometimes a tease is really just a tease. Not sure about you, but I was kinda waiting all movie for Eddie Brock and Venom to show up. True to the wacky style of the Venom films, what we got was just kinda weird. In a post-credit scene from Venom 2, Eddie and Venom are taking a break in Mexico, and just as Venom is about to show Eddie some cosmic wonders, they're transported to the MCU. It isn't explained then how this happens, but we now know that this was Doctor Strange's botched forgetting spell. In the No Way Home mid-credit scene, we see that Eddie and Venom just stayed in Mexico for the events of the film, and honestly, can you blame them? Looking back on the film now, adding these two characters would have probably pushed the film over from balancing a lot of spinning plates to an all-out train wreck. So it's probably for the best. However, the writers did leave the Venom possibilities wide open, because Venom leaves a little blobette of himself behind in the MCU when he and Eddie return to their own Sonyverse. Well, they did it. They pulled it off. Never did I think I would see a movie event quite like this. The licensing agreements between Marvel, Disney, and Sony made it seem like we'd never even see Spider-Man in the MCU, much less 3 Spider-Mans. Spider-Mans, all at once. Not only that, seeing Maguire and Garfield in this film has actually renewed my fondness for their versions of Peter Parker, and I'm not the only one, because at the time of making this video, fans online are calling for an Amazing Spider-Man 3 for Andrew Garfield, which, hey, I'm not going to make predictions anymore because I guess almost anything can happen now. So those are the Easter eggs and references I thought were cool in Spider-Man No Way Home, and yes, there are others I didn't touch on, like comparisons to the One More Day and One Moment in Time story arcs in the comics, but those require so much backstory I didn't want to get into it here. But I urge you to look up a plot synopsis or hey, even read those stories if you're interested. Oh, and ever since WandaVision, I'm not even going to entertain any more Mephisto theories until we're shown something way more solid.
Oh, what is that?
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings delivered one of the MCU's best standalone features yet, thanks to kinetic fight choreography, a charming new leading man, plenty of heart and humor, and of course, a compelling and complex villain played by Hong Kong legend Tony Leung. But I know your eyes were probably distracted by the awesome martial arts, the amazing dragon fight, and of course, Trevor Slattery, but there were a ton of hidden details packed into Marvel's latest movie. Did you catch all these Easter eggs and hidden references? Let's find out right now. One of the big trailer moments leading up to the release of the Shang-Chi movie was the final shot of the film's second trailer, which saw Abomination make his grand return while fighting none other than Wong in a cage match. This was a big deal as Tim Roth's Emil Blonsky hasn't been around since the Phase 1 movie The Incredible Hulk, and that movie tends to be ignored by the MCU since it features an Ed Norton-looking Bruce Banner. But I don't think anyone predicted the way this scene ultimately played out in Shang-Chi. While the two characters fought, both got to display their impressive skill sets, with Abomination using his brute force and Wong using his portals to make Abomination knock himself out. And you would think that would be it, but there's actually more. After the fight, Wong and Abomination are talking, and it's revealed that the two are working together right before Wong opens up a portal for them to leave. It's hard to make out, but the other end of the portal doesn't look like the Sanctum Sanctorum. It actually looks like the Raft Prison, which is the super secret and super secure prison in the middle of the ocean that housed the Rebel Avengers in Civil War. Is Abomination now being housed in the raft while Wong works to rehabilitate him? If so, why? Is Wong helping train Abomination? It seems that way based on their dialogue. Or is this some sort of off-the-books operation that just wanted to see Wong make a little extra money on the side? So many questions. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings featured a surprising cameo from a Spider-Man Homecoming character.
And I heard a rumor. You know who he is?
No, unfortunately, it wasn't anyone major, but it was still a lot of fun. The vlogger on the bus in Shang-Chi's standout action sequence is the same guy who yelled at Spider-Man in Homecoming and asked him to do a flip. His name is Clev, and you have to wonder if these two appearances are going to set up more appearances down the line. Will he be someone who cameos in multiple movies? I wouldn't mind seeing him pop up again and reveal more about his mysterious past. I mean, in Shang-Chi, we learned he did a little martial arts as a kid. How fascinating. Maybe we can expect him to show up in the Eternals and talk about how he's a history buff, so would know the details about the Eternals' presence on Earth.
Don't flip!
Or have him in Blade or something to freak out over vampires. Either or. Sure, why not? The mid-credit scene in Shang-Chi was one of the most memorable stingers in a long time. It not only set up the sequel perfectly with a compelling mystery, but it also welcomed Shang-Chi and Katie to the Avengers. Which, quick side note, I get inviting Shang-Chi, but Katie, she just learned how to use a bow and arrow a few days earlier. What, are you looking to replace Hawkeye or something? Anyways, before the awesome ending where Shang-Chi, Katie, and Wong go karaoke singing, we get quick glimpses of Captain Marvel and Bruce Banner. That's right, I said Bruce Banner. But where's Professor Hulk? Endgame established that Bruce and Hulk worked out their differences by Bruce spending 18 months in a gamma lab to fuse their brain and the brawn together permanently.
Best of both worlds.
So why is Bruce in human form in the mid-credit scene? Does it have something to do with the snap he did? His arm is still in a sling after all, suggesting that the damage there is permanent. This is something that absolutely needs to be addressed, and with Mark Ruffalo set to return in the She-Hulk TV show, look for answers there. When Shang-Chi and Katie travel to meet Shang-Chi's sister, they're met with a bit of a surprise. After checking out a seemingly run-down building, it's revealed to be the site of an epic and secretive fight club that's popular on the dark web all around the world. As the two heroes make their way through the crowd of interesting-looking fighters, one thing stands out. In one of the smaller cages, there's a fight going on that sees an extremist soldier in the middle of a brawl. It's never mentioned, but the glowing red body is a complete giveaway. The extremist soldiers were, of course, the main villains in Iron Man 3, and although it looked like all of them were dispatched by the end of the movie, it's clear now there are more running around. And yes, I know we saw the extremist soldiers play a part in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's hard to tell how canon that show is anymore. Trevor Slattery is back. We all sort of expected it one way or another, but you gotta admit that Trevor's role in the new movie unfolded in a way you didn't expect. Like, could anyone have guessed that Trevor was going to be the one who had the key to guiding our heroes to the secret city thanks to his connection with a mythical faceless creature named Morris? I don't think so. And in the film, we do get a retelling of Iron Man 3 and how the villains took the Mandarin name because Wenwu was retired. But on top of that, Trevor tells the story about how a producer interviewed him in jail, but then broke him out to take him to the real Mandarin.
No, sorry. I still don't get it.
Just in case you didn't see it, this was actually a reference to the Marvel one-shot known as All Hail the King, which was included on the Thor The Dark World DVD, but of course can now be viewed on YouTube. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. I mean, it even includes a Justin Hammer cameo. When's he coming back? The MCU has changed forever thanks to the blip. But we're still calling it that? As Ant-Man would say, is it too late to change the name? Anyways, thanks to Thanos' actions, half of Earth disappeared for 5 years before surprisingly coming back. Every post-Endgame movie will have to address this in some capacity going forward. And although it was a major plot point in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was treated as more of a joke in Spider-Man Far From Home, as they just said, oh, all of Peter's class was snapped away and came back to get over any weird narrative hurdle. And they kind of did it with Shang-Chi too. Were any of the main characters affected by the snap? If Wenwu wasn't snapped away, how did his crime organization function for those 5 years? Those types of questions hurt my brain. All we really got in reference to the events of Endgame were posters plastered around San Francisco talking about support groups for blip anxiety. I guess that's better than nothing. This one is more of a meta reference. In a funny scene, Shang-Chi has to explain the fact that he's not Korean, which feels mostly like a shout out to Simu Liu's breakout role in the hit comedy Kim's Convenience. In that show, Liu plays the son of a Korean couple who run a convenience store in Toronto. The show is Canadian and it became a huge crossover success in the United States, much like the award-winning comedy Schitt's Creek. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. In real life, Liu was born in China and immigrated to Canada when he was 5 years old. The secret fight club that Xialing runs is called the Golden Daggers Club, which is a pretty cool name for anything if I'm being honest. Put golden in front of any sort of weapon and make that your name for a restaurant, bar, sporting arena, mini mall, anything like that, and you'll have yourself a popular place. But the Golden Daggers name actually is a fun comic reference. In the Shang-Chi comics, Golden Daggers is a name of a gang that one of Shang-Chi's sisters, known as Bao Yu, formed when she escaped her father's control. You see, in the comics, Shang-Chi doesn't have one sister, he has a bunch of them. And although that wasn't the same in the movie, the writers seem to take elements from each sister and combine them together to make the entirely new character of Xialing. Jackie Chan is one of the most famous martial artists in the world. Obviously a legend in his own country, Chan also is a huge international star and people around the world grew up watching his movies that combined jaw-dropping martial arts with a perfect blend of comedy. I mean, I'll say Rush Hour 2 is a personal favorite movie of mine, which I've seen at least 30 times. He's amazing to watch, so it's no surprise that Shang-Chi, a movie all about martial arts, would want to pay homage to one of the greats. It's been said that in the bus fight, which again I'll say is an absolute triumph of a fight scene, there's an instance where Shang-Chi uses his jacket as a weapon. A lot of people have said this looks very similar to the move Jackie Chan uses in Rumble in the Bronx, and it turns out this was intentional. Simu Liu has talked about how much they wanted to include a reference to Chan. Mission accomplished. Now the next movie should include a scene where Shang-Chi jumps through a tiny grate in a casino, just like Rush Hour 2. I mean, they already had a bamboo fight, so why not? Shang-Chi traditionally wears a lot of red in his costume, and going into the film, it was a wonder to see if his superhero duds would lean more traditionally or have a bit of a modern update. For a while there, it looked like Shang-Chi would just be wearing plain clothes throughout the movie. His first outfit had a red and white color scheme, and the way he moved around in it convinced me that Shang-Chi doesn't necessarily need a special costume to look cool and perform his awesome kung fu. Maybe he was just going to be dressed like this the entire movie. But of course, he got his special dragon scale armor for the finale, and although a little basic, it still looks functional and gets the job done. Though a part of me does kind of wish he fought that entire finale in jeans and sneakers. I don't think the Great Protector would have liked that. The Marvel logo continues to expand and grow with every passing movie, and it's been fun to check out all the tiny tweaks they add to it. I mean, I don't think the Marvel logo has nearly enough Hawkeye, but that's a conversation for a different day. Anyways, the Marvel logo for Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings now includes the all-women scene from Avengers Endgame, where Captain Marvel and the MCU's fiercest female fighters all gathered together to take on Thanos' forces. A worthy addition, I might add. This isn't that important to the Shang-Chi film, but I think it's worth a mention. Okay, now who do I talk to about them adding the scene where Professor Hulk gives Ant-Man a taco? That needs to be there. So I get that the Iron Gang in Shang-Chi wanted revenge, but did they really go about it the best way? They were mad at Wenwu for all he did with the 10 rings, so they came to his home to take his wife out of the picture permanently, and although it was successful, all it did was make Wenwu angry enough to get back into a life of crime and wipe out the members of the Iron Gang. Anyways, the Iron Gang is another comic reference, with it being one of the gangs that Fu Manchu, which was Shang-Chi's father in the comics, ran in the comics. I wonder how much things would be different if instead of a rival gang like in the movie, the gang that comes to eliminate Shang-Chi's mom once works for Wenwu. Do you think he would have been so guilty that he wouldn't have put back on the rings? In the film, the big question, thanks to the mid-credit scene, is where exactly did the rings come from? It's a plot point that's sure to be the main conflict of the inevitable sequel. The movie kept where Wenwu got the rings as a mystery at the beginning, and now we know why. Gotta set up that second movie. The explanation they did give us, though, is a fun callback to the comics. The movie says that some legends see Wenwu finding them in a cave, suggesting they've been on Earth forever. Others suggest he found them in a crater, which suggests alien origin. In the comics, the rings were actually made from materials from a downed spaceship that the Mandarin found and belonged to an ancient race of space dragons known as the McLuhans. Fingers crossed for Fin Fang Foom in the sequel. As you sat through the credits to see the end credits scenes, you might have noticed the film was dedicated to Brad Allan. If you were curious on who that was, Brad was actually the stunt coordinator for the film who tragically passed away in August of this year. It's a tragic loss. Allan was part of Jackie Chan's stunt coordinator team and really gave the film a special look with its amazing fight choreography. R.I.P. Brad. Whoever's responsible for the fight choreography for the next film has very large shoes to fill. Katie was one of the best sidekick characters in a Marvel movie that we've seen. Not only was she a perfect comic relief, but she had her own arc in terms of becoming her own hero. One funny detail about her is that when she's in a fight situation, she'll start singing Hotel California, as it will immediately disarm whoever's attacking her. And it worked too, but the song actually ties in with the movie pretty well. It's about entering a dangerous world and trying desperately to find a way out, but with no success. This parallels Shang-Chi's own journey as he tried to escape the dark and seedy world his father was grooming him for. The posters on Shang-Chi's wall in his garage apartment revealed some interesting things about our titular character, mainly that he has excellent movie taste. We see posters of Kung Fu Hustle, The Warriors, and The Godfather, and you have to wonder what Shang-Chi likes about these movies. Do you think he watches Kung Fu Hustle and thinks he can do better than them? And already, The Godfather is one of the greatest movies of all time, but do you think Shang-Chi watches that film, which at its core is about a towering father figure running a criminal empire, while his innocent son slowly gets dragged into the family business and gets a little uncomfortable? He's probably the only one who's sad that Michael Corleone becomes the new Godfather at the end of the movie for obvious reasons. Early on in the film, Katie's grandma mentions how the Day of the Dead is coming up and makes a joke about how a bottle of whiskey disappeared from her husband's grave. If you were like me, you thought the Day of the Dead would be a big factor in the plot, but nothing major came from it on a story level. But thematically, it connected to the entire movie. Katie's grandma's explanation of honoring those who had passed had an interesting parallel to Wenwu's journey, who found himself going down a dark path in order to rescue his deceased wife, who he believed was trapped in a dark realm in Ta Lo. Shang-Chi even throws it in Wenwu's face about how he isn't honoring his mom's memory by threatening to destroy everything. I think that's a fun thematic callback overall, don't you? When Shang-Chi is standing shirtless in the Golden Daggers Fight Club, I understand it might be hard to look at anything else. But if you look closely, you'll see the Madripoor flag hanging in the background. Madripoor is an island in Marvel Comics that a lot of villains like to hang out in thanks to its strict non-extradition laws. And we've already seen this place in Phase 4 of the MCU, as it was featured in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show, where it gave us the iconic moment of Baron Zemo dancing. Can we go back there, please? It wouldn't be a Disney movie if there weren't some fun, adorable side creature that they could make toys out of. In this case, that means Morris, the Daijang that Trevor thought only he could see. But if you were curious about this creature, as well as all the other fantastical creatures in Shang-Chi, then you're in luck. These actually weren't just comic-based creatures, but they all exist in ancient Chinese mythology. Like, go and Google food dogs, and I think you'll immediately want one as a pet. Oh, is that just me? You're right, the food bill for one of those things would be enormous. Ta Lo opened up a whole new world for the MCU, and I think I mean that literally. Michelle Yeoh's Nan is one of the protectors of Ta Lo, and when she speaks to Shang-Chi about stopping Wenwu, she says things like protecting your universe. That implies that Ta Lo isn't in our universe and exists separately in a different universe. In the comics, Ta Lo is a pocket dimension and exists outside our main universe. We've already seen other instances of this in the MCU with things like Doctor Strange's Dark Dimension and even the Quantum Realm. But the question is, how does Ta Lo exist within the big multiverse that the MCU is building up?
It's Daniel Craig's swan song to being 007, so let's take a look at all the little references, Easter eggs, and little moments you may have missed in this send-off. Also, spoiler alert, like for the whole thing. Don't say I didn't warn you. For the first reference, let's start way back with Daniel Craig's first outing as Bond in Casino Royale. In that movie, we see Craig's first big adventure in Montenegro, but it takes until the very end of the movie to hear the iconic "It's Bond, James Bond." For No Time to Die, it's a similar situation because, and again, spoiler alert, 007 bites the dust in this one. For real this time. And it's not even actually him who says those iconic words. Instead, it's Madeline who says it at the very end. But don't worry too much, Craig does get one last time to say it when he goes back to MI6, but Craig's first and last movies ending on almost the exact same line just works so much better on a list like this. Let's stay on Bond and Madeline's relationship for a little bit since it's a big part of this movie and Spectre too technically. So in the beginning, during Bond's vacation, he says to her that they have all the time in the world, which works because of the title of this movie, No Time to Die, duh. But it's also a line taken right from the first and, well, last George Lazenby-led film On Her Majesty's Secret Service by Laserbeam's Bond, and while the roles have been switched to where Madeline is the one who survives in the movie after the line is said, it's still a great callback to one of the OGs. Okay, last thing about Madeline, but this also ties into some of the other important women in Bond's life. Why are they all related to the letter M? So of course there's M, who's been the M for most of this Bond's tenure, who was obviously played by the Dame Judi Dench, who through some sleuths paying attention to her belongings during the end of Skyfall, found out that her name was Olivia Mansfield, so she's like M squared or something, although that was never officially confirmed. And then both Madeline and Matilda, the last woman he ever loved, and his daughter, both have M's in their names, and even Moneypenny, who I wouldn't really consider that important, but still, there's an M right there, and if you look into the books, Bond's mom's name was Monique. M is also the 13th letter of the alphabet, so if you want to be superstitious, you could probably draw something between that and the very eventful but also incredibly violent life that Bond leads. It could really go either way, but since he doesn't have a say in any of the M's in his life, it is strange that he attracts so many. Doesn't explain Vesper from Casino Royale, but we'll talk about her later. Since we were just on M's, let's talk about some M's from Bond's past. So with Dench's M being KIA in Skyfall, we're introduced to Gareth Mallory, another M, played by Ray Fiennes in Spectre, who returns here, but he's not the only other M to make an appearance. There's a picture of both Dench's M as well as Robert Brown's M, who was the second person to take on the mantle in the new M's office. I didn't see one with Bernard Lee, who was the original, but it's not like you can rewind in the movie theater either, so who knows. Now, that calls into question stuff like, does this make all the other Bonds canon? Is James Bond really just a code name, and if it is, why is the new 007 not named James Bond? But if you take the time and just think, oh, that's pretty cool, you'll realize that it's just a cool shout out. No need to think too hard about the cool spy movie with explosions. Even though Dench's M has been replaced, her memory and spirit live on, and not just in pictures in stuffy office rooms. One of the things that Dench's M left Bond was this cute little bulldog figure that she had on her desk in Skyfall, and we get another glimpse of it when Bond goes to get his personal Aston Martin. I couldn't find anything about why exactly she had a bulldog figure, or why she gave it to Bond after, but it's a cool little trinket. I mean, he didn't think it was cool enough to take it with him to Jamaica, but maybe that was even part of his way of leaving that life behind. So earlier, when I had mentioned that the letter M had a connection with most of all the important women in Bond's life, but not all of them, I said that because of Vesper Lynd from Casino Royale. I mean, you could say that since they meet on their way to Montenegro, that's your M, but I feel like that's kind of a stretch. Anyway, even though she died in 2006, Bond still sees her as the one who got away and even visits her grave at the beginning of the movie. It's a nice moment of reflection for both Bond and the audience, and also acts as a way for him to move on. It's too bad he only had 5 years after moving on, but hey, progress is progress. Alright, this is the last sad No Time to Die Easter egg, I promise. So during Bond's funeral, Fiennes M eulogizes him with this quote: "The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time." And that's pretty much the entire ethos of every Bond. It's all about being bold and getting after what you want. It's actually very similar in a lot of ways to the manners maketh man speech from Kingsman, or rather the manners maketh man speech is like this one, since this quote comes from Jack London, a dude from the 19th and early 20th century who is known for being the inventor of science fiction writing. And with a lot of aspects of Bond being based in a more grounded science fiction, sometimes, I think the quote encapsulates what a good Bond should be. I mean, how else would you describe a man of action like Bond? Now, what's the first thing you think about when you hear the words James Bond? Is it the cool, elegant cars, all the gadgets that you totally wouldn't use to commit crimes, or is it the cool press suits? For me, it's the quotes. And of course, one of the most iconic ones is shaken, not stirred. The first movie that quote appeared in was the first Bond movie, Dr. No, by Dr. No, and it wasn't until Goldfinger when Connery's Bond utters the phrase. Craig's Bond finally says the line, which is much different than his first appearance where a bartender asks him if he wants it shaken or stirred, and because he lost some money earlier, he snaps with a, "Do I look like I give a damn?" Good to see him not only calm down over the past 15 years, but also gets to say the phrase one last time. Well, since I did mention the cool, elegant cars in the last entry, I figured I had to talk about the Bond car, the Aston Martin DB5. Starting back in Goldfinger again, it's been a mainstay in the series, and Craig's Bond has driven it in every one of his movies except for Quantum of Solace for some reason. He drives a newer version, the DBS V12, but there was no love for the classic in that one. In No Time to Die though, he drives the OG and uses the car's Gatling guns last used in Skyfall, but before that, they hadn't been used since, again, we keep going back to it, Goldfinger back in 1964. That's over 50 years ago. And I gotta say, I'm glad he was able to actually use it again. Hopefully, we never go almost half a century before Bond uses one of his coolest gadgets again. Another returning character from Bond's past is his American counterpart, Felix Leiter. First introduced to Craig's Bond in Casino Royale, he says he's a brother from Langley, and when he's unalived by Ash in this movie, when Bond avenges him, he tells Ash that he's doing it for his brother. If you couldn't tell already, this movie is all about closure. All the major players who were alive before the beginning of this movie at least make a comeback like Moneypenny and Q, but unfortunately, Leiter doesn't get the same happy ending as those two. There's also been 6 other Felixes, but Jeffrey Wright's version has been the only one in 3 movies. There is technically another one, but we don't count non-Eon movies over here. Also, bonus thing. And since we were just talking about Q, let's talk about a callback to Spectre. If you need a refresher, in Spectre, Bond is doing unauthorized missions, disobeying the new M's orders, and just being very difficult to work with. So when he goes to Q for help, Q's reluctant and says that he has a mortgage and 2 cats to feed. And you know what? That's very understandable. You can't just help a guy when your boss tells you not to, especially when you work for the government. But when Bond and Moneypenny go to his house, we finally get to see those 2 cats. I don't know about you, but this is exactly the type of closure I needed, and this is definitely top 3 callbacks in this movie for me. We've talked a lot about different other movies that Bond and other characters have been in, but we've barely talked about any of the villains, and this movie really likes one of them. So there's a bunch of different references between Dr. No and Safin. They both have a thing for using pools to create their deadly super weapons. They have god complexes, which we'll get to in a little bit, and their secret layers are also very similar. The director, Cary Fukunaga, has said that it's not a reinvention of the character and that Safin is his own thing, but he sure does take a bunch of the Dr. No boxes. Even outside of Safin himself, we see someone wearing Dr. No's hazmat suit, and even the intro sequence is very similar in style. For this Bond's last movie, paying homage to the first one does make a whole lot of sense though. So, with Safin being a brand new character, let's talk about his plan. Well, aside from him getting revenge on Spectre and later Bond, we don't know, but that actually isn't a bad thing. For all the Bond villains before him, they all did the same, haha, I have captured you now and will reveal my entire plan because I am smart and you are not, haha. But Safin doesn't do that at all. It's a really nice change, and sure, it would have been nice to know why he thinks spreading a deadly nanobot virus around the world is a good thing, or a thing that he even wants to do, but sometimes the mystery is better than knowing outright. Alright, so we talked about the characters and symbolism and all that, but let's talk about some of the action. So when Bond goes after Ash to avenge Leiter's death, he delivers the final blow by shoving a flipped car so that it falls and crushes the dude, which is brutal, but the Bond character seems to like to do this because this isn't even the first time that he's done this very specific takedown move. In For Your Eyes Only, Roger Moore does the same thing to an assassin, although he kicks the car off a ledge with the assassin still inside. So even with all the gadgets and weapons at his disposal, Bond knows that a good solid kick can solve a whole lot of problems. Even before Bond's end, he was replaced as 007 by Nomi, and initially, they don't have the best relationship. A lot of it is coming from Nomi being the young up-and-comer and feeling like she's better than the old guard, and I mean, yeah, I feel her on that. But specifically, you can see that animosity from her come out when she says to Moneypenny, I get why you shot him. Now, that was an accident in Skyfall, or at least she made it seem like one. Luckily, throughout the course of this movie, Nomi and Bond's relationship grows and there's a, for lack of a better word, a strong bond between them, and by the end, she genuinely cares for him and respects him. Still love the youthful arrogance though, and I promise I'm not biased in that. Time for the random children's cartoon reference that I love to make in these. So in the beginning, when we see baby Madeline, she's playing with a Tamagotchi, and on the screen, she's watching a classic Wallace and Gromit movie, The Wrong Trousers. Trust me, this is important to the plot, because after the second time skip, we see some bad guys are recreating a scene from that movie by scaling a building and attempting to steal something. Who says you can't learn something from a cartoon? I never said that you would learn something good, but you learn something nonetheless. Let's talk about Cyclops, and unfortunately, I'm not talking about the mutant. So the person that gives Bond the most trouble the most times in this is Primo, or Cyclops, who is a guy with a bionic eye that is like the one from that one Black Mirror episode. Since he started working for Spectre, it's interesting that the guy leading Spectre, Blofeld, also has a bionic eye. Now, that doesn't seem like it would come with just the normal standard issue Spectre uniform, so it's interesting that they both share that. With people having very specific physical character traits being such a big thing in these movies recently, I really hope that they bring back Jaws in the future, because him in the Everything or Nothing tie-in game is probably my favorite character in the series. So far we've had references to Connery's, Lazenby's, and Moore's, but what about Brosnan's Bond? Well, in Jamaica, during Bond's vacation away from the hubbub of spy work, when he gets back to his house, he notices that someone was in there smoking, and when he finds the cigar, it's a Delictado branded one. Back in Die Another Day, asking for a Delictado cigar was how Brosnan's Bond woke up a sleeper agent. So that's 4 out of the 5 other Bonds, with Timmy D's Bond being the only one that I couldn't find a reference to. I mean, I guess when Safin says license to kill, that counts, but aside from that, nothing. Let me know in the comments if there's a stronger reference that you noticed. Rami Malek Safin is a weird guy. I mean, if you're gonna be a Bond villain, you have to be, but there's something deeply unsettling about him in this. From his very particular way of talking to him being by far the smartest villain Bond has ever faced, since this one actually does succeed in unaliving him, Malek does a great job portraying him, and what's interesting is that Safin has a connection to another one of Rami Malek's roles. In the amazing show that I still need to finish, Mr. Robot, his character Elliot has a monologue talking about how he feels about men who play God. In this movie, Safin compares himself to an invisible god getting under the skin of people, with Bond saying, "You know that history isn't too kind to those who play God." Even though they're two extremely different characters, it's nice that Rami Malek has been playing characters long enough to see himself become the villain. Finally, we're ending this one on a Prince Roy 2-for-1 special, patent pending. So during the opening Bond gun barrel sequence, instead of blood dripping down the screen, it has Bond's silhouette fade to white as it segues into the opening flashback, which then ties into Bond's death scene, which has him disappearing in a flash of white as the missiles hit Safin's island. And the second time that we get a reference to the Bond barrel, there's a shot in the movie where Bond runs in a tunnel and points the gun towards the screen, which makes it look just like the iconic entrance. If you couldn't tell, I love a good visual motif. Just ties everything together. Dune's got a lot going on for only telling half of the story of the first book, so whether you know the way of the Golden Path or just found out about Dune, let's take a look at some of the things you may have missed or didn't notice in Villeneuve's Dune, and there's gonna be spoilers for a lot, so brace yourself. So from the movie, you can tell that the Fremen of Arrakis have a strong love for the giant sandworms named Shai-Hulud, or the Maker, depending on who you ask. I mean, they are important for the spice, so that makes sense, but the presence of worm symbolism extends way past just that in this universe. One of the giant spaceships we see, a Highliner, looks very wormy, as well as even the Baron at one point while he's floating, which I'll get to, also seems to be a nod to Dune's potential future, but let's not get ahead of ourselves too much. I mean, I'm gonna talk about God Emperor because it's a cool name, but we can't just front load everything right now. Okay, but let's actually go back to the Baron floating because the way he floats is another one of Dune's subtle tech inclusions. So when we first see it being used, it's kinda obvious that the Baron might have a little too much meat on his bones and that's how he gets around, but he's not the only one who uses the suspensors, which the name didn't make me think of Urkel, but here we are. The other people that we see using the suspensors are the Sardaukar during both the invasion of Arrakeen, the place on Arrakis, and when they assault the Fremen ecological hideout. We only see them used in 2 books, and one Dune fans tend to not want to talk about, so it's cool that we got to see them used in a combat scenario in this movie. Last thing about the worms, I promise, but one of the things that the movie makes very clear is that the Shai-Hulud look for rhythmic patterns, and it's not just because they love a good beat either. When one of them is about to munch on Paul and Jessica, it looks like it's trying to communicate in some way, but that thumping bass sound coming from its insides seems to be why they're so drawn to rhythmic patterns. It's a way for them to defend their territory. And in the books, they mainly only eat sand, so it's not like they're looking for food that way either. Honestly, let's just forget all that political intrigue. I can't wait to see more of that wormy action in part 2. While the Atreides clan is still on Caladan, there's a lot of bull references, which we learn is because Paul's grandpa liked to bullfight, for reasons, but because he eventually lost, they hang the bull up as a memory, along with some other bull paraphernalia all around. But all that bull talk was actually foreshadowing what was going to happen on Arrakis. To see why, we gotta get into some etymology. So the word Harkonnen is derived from the Finnish word Harka, and guess what Harka means? Ox, which is technically different than a bull, but close enough because at least for part 1, the Harkonnen proved to be the downfall of the Atreides as the bull was to Grand Paul. Now, if only there was another cycle of violence that is perpetrated throughout history that the novels expanded upon. Now, let's talk about some of the other versions of Dune, specifically Jodorowsky's weird unmade version. In terms of cult movies that were never made, Jodorowsky's vision has to be at least top 3 of all time. Even with it having very little to do with Dune actually, Villeneuve still pays homage to it in a couple of ways. The first one comes when we first see Giedi Prime. Because of its dark and somewhat biological mechanical feel to it, it feels like a city made out of whatever the xenomorphs are made out of, which makes sense because that's what H.R. Giger made, and he was also attached to Jodorowsky's Dune. The second instance comes from the trailer, so it's less important to this video, but the song that plays is a cover of a Pink Floyd song, and Jodorowsky wanted to have Pink Floyd to do the soundtrack. Jodorowsky is a weird guy, and his version of Dune would have also been super weird, but even with it not being released, it's cool that some parts at least have been carried forward into this version. Before Villeneuve's and after Jodorowsky's failed attempt, there was David Lynch's version, which, unlike this one, is a full story, but also unlike this one, is very silly. He still gets at least one shout out in this version though too. So after the Duke bites the dust, ha ha ha, please laugh. When the Harkonnen are cleaning up, they're wearing hazmat suits since the area must still be toxic, but those suits look suspiciously like the Sardaukar from Lynch's version. Time hasn't been very kind to Lynch's version, and while I will always defend my favorite weatherman, I will say that it's nice that he also got a little nod in this too. A big part of the movie is trying to decipher Paul's visions. Some of them are proven to be wrong or not literal, like with Jameis not being the nice teacher of the ways of the sand like in his visions, but his visions aren't seeing the future, they're seeing potential futures, and the movie doesn't really explain that. But even with that, the idea or the main points of those visions seem to be where the movie wants to move the narrative. So for example, back with Jameis again. Sure, he doesn't take Paul under his wing to teach him, but in their fight, he does end up teaching him about violence and the ways of the Fremen. It's just not in the way he would have liked. Hopefully though, we do end up getting to see that massive Power Ranger fight on Caladan in all its glory. Okay, while the fight between Jameis and Paul is largely the same with a few differences like the location and what they're wearing, it's close enough that it doesn't matter. So it was kind of weird when before the fight, Chani doesn't give Paul the same advice that she does in the book. In the book, she warns him about Jameis being able to use both hands in the fight and that he should watch for the knife to switch. While that doesn't happen, Jameis still switches hands, so at least those with knowledge of the book would have that little Easter egg to find. It's not hugely important to the story, but hey, if you couldn't tell by now, this movie loves putting little moments and symbols in that have no bearing on really anything. Since we didn't get a lot of time with the Fremen as a whole, a lot of their culture isn't known to us. We know that because they live in the desert, they value that sweet 70% of us, but aside from that, we don't know anything really concrete. One thing that you might have missed is that right before the Jameis-Paul fight, when the Fremen sheathe their blades, they cut their hands first because they believe that if you draw your weapon, it has to draw blood. Now, it is a little weird when Mapes, a Fremen, draws her blade to show Jessica and doesn't draw blood when she sheathes it, but maybe that's because she was giving the blade to her and didn't want to dirty it up. This is where some continuity problems start popping up, but most people didn't even notice, so who cares, it's fine. Usually when bad guys say something, they're lying, but the Baron is different. He'll say something so specific and agree with a person's demands, but only if his words are vague enough so that he can always default on, I did exactly what I said. Kinda like a big child, or a genie. In the movie, this happens twice. The first is when he tells Gaius Helen Mohayim that he will not lay a finger on Jessica and Paul, only to try and let the desert kill them instead. The second comes when he tells Dr. Yue that he'll be able to join his wife soon, but only because they're gonna be floating in that big sandbox in the sky. You're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, even though that's exactly what a book cover is designed for, but when a dude that looks like the Baron tells you anything that sounds too good to be true, it's for sure too good to be true. Let's keep going with things that the movie shows but doesn't talk about at all. The Spacing Guild, or the Guild of Navigators, is a group that holds faster than light travel exclusively so that you have to go through them to use it. Navigators are these creatures that have been mutated from constant spice use, and they guide ships through prescience so that when a ship essentially teleports across the universe, they don't bump into a planet and explode. While we don't see any navigators directly, when the Herald of the Change comes to Caladan, he's joined by members and representatives of the Spacing Guild. Considering how powerful the guild is with their hold on FTL travel, them showing up to this shows just how important this change and how important Arrakis is to the Empire and really the universe. Here's another thing that they show but don't expand on at all. So when the Atreides first land on Arrakis, we see Gurney Halleck reading something before the ship lands. What he was reading is called the Orange Catholic Bible, which was first called the Karangiana Zen Christian Scriptures, but then because Karangiana kinda sounds like orange, and Zen Christian was changed to Catholic, which can also mean all-encompassing since the book is an amalgamation of all the religions on Earth, OCB became the new name. Now, in the books, there's only two main devotees that matter in the story, Dr. Yue and Gurney, with Gurney often reciting various verses. Considering that Gurney doesn't really get a lot of screen time in this, little details like this do help flesh out his character. I mean, only if you knew that beforehand. But that's why you have videos like these. Since we were just talking about him, let's talk about what happened to Gurney Halleck, since we see him fight during the invasion, but we don't see what happens to him. Well, because this likely will be talked about in the next movie, and spoiling a movie that technically hasn't even been announced yet, as I was editing this, they just confirmed part 2, so there you go. I'll just say that he shouldn't be dead, and that we should be seeing him soon. Yep, that's totally vague enough. Well, what happened to the nice old guy that we also got zero backstory on? Well, his name is Thufir Hawat. He's a Mentat, which just means he's a guy who can do what a computer can do. And since this is similar to what happened to Gurney, I'll also just say that he should totally still be alive and will probably also be included in the next movie. They did already change his plotline from thinking that Jessica could be a mole though, so anything could change, but I'd prefer not to say more than I actually need to for things like this. Another character that has long-reaching importance is Duncan Idaho. I mean, with a name like that, he's gotta be important. So we talked about Paul's visions and how they're more about potential futures, but his vision on Idaho is pretty spot on, and we get a clue to it before it even happens. So when we see Paul's first vision at the end, we see a little beetle, and right before Idaho starts his last stand, we see him playing with one. And because Dune just loves animal metaphors, beetles, specifically of the dung and scarab varieties, are references to the Egyptian god Khepri, who can represent renewal and creation, which, well, let's just go to the next entry so I can talk about it a little bit more. So, we just talked about his death, but are we sure that he's actually dead? But we saw him die, you just talked about it, you exclaim at your screen. Well, that's true, and because this is a spoiler for Dune Messiah, the second book and most likely third movie, I feel like I'm in the clear, and if not, I'm about to spoil Dune Messiah and most likely the third movie. Duncan Idaho comes back as a character named Hate as a Gola, which just means that they're a clone. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is because after we already see Duncan's last stand, we see a Fremen who looks oddly close to the space surfer dude that we came to love. It's not clear what this scene even is either. It looks like an inverse shot of one of Paul's visions, but it doesn't have the same orangey glow, and in the books, Hate isn't made by the Fremen, so this inclusion is just very strange. If you've got any ideas on what this scene really was, definitely drop them down in the comments. Now, let's talk about the spaceships and how spice works with them. So the movie puts a lot of emphasis on spice being used as the way that these ships travel, but they don't talk about how at all. It's not used in the same way that oil or even other forms of energy work. Rather, it actually allows those navigators that I mentioned earlier to fold space and time. Now, if you can just wormhole your way around the cosmos, then it makes sense that if you look at the few spaceships that we do see, there's no thrusters or even any of that basic spaceship propulsion systems that you usually see. Again, little details like that almost no one will care about just makes this world feel so much more cohesive. Speaking of the world, at the beginning of the movie, we get a year that the movie takes place. The year 10,191. However, this movie doesn't take place just 8,000 years from our own time now. Instead of going off of our present calendar system, it's actually going off the year that the Spacing Guild was created. So anything before that is BG and anything after that is AG. On the Dune fandom, which so graciously did all the math so I wouldn't have to, they concluded that the year would actually be 23,352 AD, which gives us an extra 10,000 years of human development to account for. When things are set thousands of years in the future, it can get a little difficult to rationalize it, but just remember that only 1,000 years ago were the Middle Ages, and pretty much any tech that we have now would be considered witchcraft back then. So just imagine all the wild stuff that we haven't seen yet in this universe. In Dune's case though, they could also just be a different time frame entirely because not everything has to be based on our very specific universe. But if I can give you guys a random fact that could give context, I'm gonna do it. Even without the context of everything else, Dune makes it very clear that Paul is supposed to be a pretty big deal in the grand scheme of galactic and universal politics. His first taste of that comes during his time with the Fremen, but his title among them is teased multiple times during the movie, and it's all because of this little guy. Throughout the movie, twice by my count, we see these guys and Paul seems to have a connection to them, if only because they look so cute. Now, the reason why they matter is because the little sand mice are called Muad'Dib, which is a name that Paul gets during his time with the Fremen. Sure, Desert Mouse isn't the most intimidating name, but it's cool that we got a tease to this important step in Paul's future. Also, WB and Legendary, you could definitely make some Muad'Dib plushies. I mean, people bought the screaming penguin things from Star Wars, so I'm pretty sure they'll buy anything. Finally, let's end where the movie begins. Now, to me, when the unintelligible, bone-shattering speech hit my eardrums, my first thought was, I don't think I'm gonna like this movie. But the message itself comes with importance to the story. Of course, it's a reference to the dreams and visions of Paul in this movie, but dreams and prescience in general have a really big role in the Dune universe. But the issue is, we don't know who's saying this or why. We know that it isn't someone using the voice, because you can still understand that, and while it does sound similar to the Sardaukar car, it doesn't really make sense for them to say it since they're not really involved with these visions. I've already seen theories to it being the characters from Dune's past, all the way up to the God Emperor himself, and while it's not like we would find that out for several years if they do plan on continuing this franchise that long, these movies being a sort of recollection while on his proverbial deathbed, or him reliving things through his other memories, could make this one of my favorite franchise hints. And if that paragraph didn't make any sense, don't worry, a trip to your local wiki fandom can help out a whole lot.
Oh look, there's a new $200 million adventure film on Netflix starring Dwayne Johnson, Ryan Reynolds, and Gal Gadot. A name that I will never pronounce 100% accurately. Anyway, I guess I'll explain 20 things you missed, or something, maybe. Yeah, let's do it.
You're right, we should wash up first. It's okay. You're safe here.
First up, gotta talk about them eggs. See, Cleopatra's eggs are completely fabricated for the film. The idea that Antony had them made as gifts for his Egyptian girlfriend is something writer-director Ross and Marshall Thurber came up with to give his trio of humorous Hollywood elites something to chase through studios for. However, the idea of the eggs is technically based on real-world history. You've probably heard of the Fabergé egg, which was a jeweled egg made by the Russian jewelry firm House of Fabergé between the years 1885 and 1917. 52 eggs out of a total of 69 were created for the wives and mothers of Tsars Alexander III and Nicholas II. Hey, 69 is not a funny number. Yes, it is a funny number. What am I saying? Some of them are still missing to this day, leaving them open as perfect plot devices. And heck, they've been used in other movies, Ocean's 12 and Octopussy, to name two of the most famous examples. Of course, these aren't Fabergé eggs. These are fictional Egyptian eggs. People love eggs, especially Dwayne Johnson. Look at that guy. Jesus. Imagine how many chickens it takes to satiate that heaping mound of flesh. Anyway, enough artsy crap, let's talk big Johnsons and small cars. Specifically, Dwayne Johnson fitting his massive frame into this tiny Porsche Taycan Turbo S. Of course, one brief use of the Beastie Boys Sabotage and a rogue gelato truck later, and the Porsche is no more, cutting what might have been a wild Michael Bay-level car chase short. Now, I don't know if they had planned a full chase before realizing Johnson couldn't fit in the Porsche. That seems unlikely, but if this whole gag is based on his insanely wide back, it does kind of make it all that much better. Side note, I love how you never get a clear shot of Johnson getting in or out of the car. They always employ a cut to help us believe the fiction that this big some gun could just pop in and out of this itty-bitty product placement. Man, I would love one of those now. Oh wait, I work for a YouTube channel. Okay, movie references. You know them, you love them, you usually spot them before these videos come out, and tell me about it in the comments. Probably the most obvious example that isn't a line spit out by Ryan Reynolds.
That's nice.
Yeah, that's a Borat reference. A good job, little buddy. The most obvious example is this quick shot of a box in the underground bunker. Looks awfully familiar, huh? Well, in a film that apes Indiana Jones in a lot of ways, it's fitting that the Ark of the Covenant box from the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark would show up here. Of course, if you didn't get that reference, it's okay, because Ryan Reynolds whistles the theme to Indiana Jones just to make sure you, the audience, understand that this is a globe-trotting adventure film about treasure hunters. Hey, see this CGI bull? Okay, now see this CGI bull from the Netflix comedy Sextuplets? Netflix loves CGI bulls. Case closed. And real bulls made of big, hulking human flesh. Oh, look at that man. Oh, look at him. Oh, he has a bull tattoo and he got hit by a bull. There's another one. Free, right there. Okay, but seriously, there are a lot of studio setups in this film. If you watch closely, we very rarely see our big boy actors on location. There's possibly some stuff in Rome, but overall it's mostly studio work mixed with green screen and second unit location photography. For me, this was a big hindrance for the film. It's a big globetrotting adventure, and yet you can tell there's not actually much globetrotting going on. Compare this to, I don't know, No Time to Die, which did have similar setups like this Cuba set, but there's also a ton of action that very obviously takes place in Italy and Jamaica. It helps to give the adventure element a more tangible feel that sucks the audience into that world. That doesn't really exist here. Now, that lack of real-life locations is down to two things, I think. Well, two things plus saving a crapload of money on this somehow $200 million film, which I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, this might be one of those times where the filmmakers tried to reverse engineer a reason for their decisions, but positive me likes to think the best of people. So, in an interview, producer Hiram Garcia called Red Notice a throwback to movies from back in the day. I'm not sure what exactly that means. He doesn't elaborate too much, but basically, he defined that as a big movie star heavy film, not based on a previous IP. Now, setting aside that Red Notice is so reliant on previous franchises that it might as well be one, this makes me think back to the adventure films of the 40s and 50s, old Errol Flynn films, sword and sandal epics, that sort of thing. It was rare for those movies to shoot a lot of the stars' big acting sequences on location. The African Queen is one that shot mostly on location in Africa despite its big-ass cameras and equipment. Accidental or not, it's an interesting angle from which to approach this movie. That it's not just a throwback, but a throwback to way long ago when we couldn't actually shoot on location for a reasonable amount of money. Oh, actually, you know what? It's another great example. Cleopatra is a great example of this happening. They built a huge set and went way over budget. Oh my goodness. Oh, Cleopatra. That is what a disaster. But really, a big component was probably COVID. The production started in 2019 and was shuttered temporarily in 2020 because, you know, the big bad no good times. And if you watch closely, you can tell from the lack of crowds and hefty use of 2 or 3 person scenes that anytime they could, the production mitigated risk, and the almost absurd use of sets and green screen to get across the world-spanning adventure certainly fits in with that. And yes, I did just get 3 entries out of that detail. There's not a whole lot to miss here, so you know, it's pretty simple stuff. I don't have a lot for you. I'm sorry.
I see what the problem is. That's the problem.
That is not kind.
You know what's not?
Hey, you see that gin Ryan's drinking? That's Aviation American gin, of which Ryan is a pretty relentless shill just about any time he gets a chance, because, hey, he's got bills to pay, man. Although, according to Reynolds, it was Dwayne Johnson's idea, which leads me to... Oh, look, there's Terramana Tequila being served to its owner, Dwayne Johnson. Look at that. I guess he was just getting ahead of any future arguments over shameless product placement by doubling up on the product placement. Now, okay, this deepfake tech, yeah, makes no sense. It would take forever to render that sucker. You'd need way more images. Not sure how the hell he got the voice thing to work. It's a mess. But what struck me about this was how Ryan Reynolds' character was the one using it after his previous big old blockbuster Free Guy used the more real-world version of the tech extensively in its VFX, which I did a video on. You can go check that out. Or not, whatever. Late in the film, we learn an important character detail. John Hartley here is not a cinephile.
You ever see Sullivan's Travels?
No, I haven't.
Sullivan's Travels is a frankly fantastic 1941 film starring Joel McCrea and directed by Preston Sturges, who directed the equally great The Lady Eve that same year. Anyway, oh my gosh, my Screen Rant shot collar is vibrating. I'm about to get decimated for talking about movies from pre-1990. Anyway, it's about a Hollywood director who's tired of making the same old dreck and yearns to shoot a more serious drama called Oh Brother Where Art Thou? In order to get into the mindset of the poor, downtrodden masses he wishes to depict, he dresses up as a hobo and hits the road. In the end, spoilers, he decides to just keep making dumb comedies because while they aren't filled with depth or pathos, they serve a purpose in bringing joy to those less fortunate. Kinda like Red Notice. Oh wow, a Wilhelm scream. Cool. While searching for the egg in the underground bunker, Johnson asks,
How are we gonna find this egg?
to which Ryan Reynolds replies,
Look for a box that says MacGuffin.
A MacGuffin, for those in the back, is a term made famous by Alfred Hitchcock, but coined originally by screenwriter Angus MacPhail to indicate an object central to the plot with little significance beyond propelling the narrative forward. The aforementioned Ark of the Covenant is a good example, although generally a MacGuffin doesn't melt Nazis.
You know what I think is funny, Booth?
Vin Diesel's audition tape for Cats? It exists.
Come on. 100% Dwayne Johnson came up with that line. 100%. 100. For those of you not knee-deep in Fast and Furious knowledge, Johnson and Vin Diesel, they don't really get along, and that made them working together on those films extensively tense and even necessitated a spin-off film for the character Luke Hobbs. Perfect timing considering that now infamous Instagram post from Diesel. Ryan Reynolds' character Nolan is the son of a police officer, which works out really well considering Reynolds himself is also the son of a police officer. And hey, see the boat that Nolan is using to get to his definitely in Bali hideaway? It says, "We're gonna make it, Rose," a reference of course to Titanic. Y'all, straight up, I'm running out of things you might have conceivably missed. I guess for the kiddos watching, at one point, this party is referenced as an Eyes Wide Shut party because in the Stanley Kubrick-directed Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman cinematic masterpiece Eyes Wide Shut, there's a party. Like this one. Except everyone's having sex. Oh, speaking of that party, did you recognize the actor playing Sotto Voce? Dude's name is Chris Diamantopoulos, and you've definitely seen or heard him before. He was Mo in the criminally underrated Three Stooges movie. He's the voice of Mickey Mouse in The Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse. He's not the official voice of Mickey Mouse, but in that series of shorts on Disney Plus, he's the voice. He was Darkwing Duck in DuckTales, and he's noted 3 Commas recipient Russ Hanneman in Silicon Valley.
Eat this. Open your mouth. Open your mouth. Eat it. Don't chew. Just let it dissolve.
By the way, sotto voce is also a term for lowering one's voice or to say something quietly so as to not be overheard. This makes a lot of sense considering how good old Russ Hanneman over here reads all his lines.
Down here, beneath the bulls, no one will hear your screams.
Finally, I gotta mention the one big production detail that left a really positive impression on me. The drones. As I mentioned, there's a lot of second unit work going on here to make it seem like our stars are in far-off countries and junk, and with that comes plenty of drone shots. But shots like this one really impress me. Not only is it a novel use of the drone technology, but it's not unlike what we're seeing in the trailers for Michael Bay's upcoming Ambulance. And the way it's integrated with VFX is really impressive. Just watch, we go from zooming through Rome seamlessly into this shot of Dwayne Johnson getting out of a normal-sized car. We start off in the sky, zoom through the streets, and the shot doesn't have an obvious cut until Johnson and co-star Ritu Aria enter the museum. That right there, that's good stuff. Venom, Let There Be Carnage, a film so fast-paced it forgot to include a second act, had a rockin' debut, totally decimating pandemic box office numbers. Vis-a-vis, my boss just called and told me to come up with 25 things you might have missed in Venom 2. Or else I'm fired. And, yes, I do work for J. Jonah Jameson, and he's a nightmare. So, here are just 25 things you may have missed or just didn't quite understand, or, I don't know, maybe you just want to hang out with some random schlub on the internet to talk about it in a fast-paced manner. Either way, let's dig in. First up, we gotta mention the spider elephant in the room. Spoiler, by the way. Maybe pause and go watch this film before watching a video about stuff you missed. Cool? You done? Pretty good, right? Anyway, a little symbiote lunch meat himself, Tom Holland, makes an appearance on TV during the mid-credits sequence, something I thought we were all trained to stay and wait for, but if my audience was in the indication, that is not the case. J. Jonah Jameson also shows up, sorta, in recycled footage, telling us through the Daily Bugle's InfoWars-style show that Spidey is, in fact, noted Mysterio murderer Peter Parker. The shot we get of Pete is different from the coverage we saw at the end of Far From Home, but it gets the idea across that we are, in fact, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, how did we get here? Well, while Venom was teaching Eddie about the vast knowledge of the symbiote hive mind, I guess Doctor Strange just so happened to also be casting his whoopsie spell to erase everyone's memory. Although that does beg the question, why then would Venom be transported to the day Spidey's identity is revealed? I don't know, perhaps it's a new segment about the big reveal. Maybe Strange's spell sent Venom back in the past slightly. Maybe it has more to do with Venom pulling from information across the multiverse. Who knows? Hopefully we will when No Way Home is released later this year. Of course, there are multiple references to Spider-Man outside of him just straight up existing. At one point, Venom states, "Responsibility is for the mediocre," presumably a dig at the famous Uncle Ben line, "With great power comes great responsibility." Now, being an anti-hero, Venom is of course less concerned with responsibility, but more than happy to use that their great power. Or it's referring to the classic Martin Sheen Uncle Ben line. I'm kidding, no. No one ever talks about that one. Also, Cletus crushes a spider. Again, this is not a subtle film.
Like a turd in the wind.
Comic book fans, of course, already have noted the presence of Detective Patrick Mulligan, who bonds with the offspring of Carnage to become the anti-hero Toxin. Now, most outlets have suggested that this revival, after getting his ass whooped by Shriek, is set up for Toxin entering the franchise. While that may very well be the case, it is a bit confounding that his eyes turn the same shade as Shriek's bad eye. I guess not really a bad eye, just the contact lens eye, whatever, suggesting that perhaps he's gotten her powers as well, or instead of his own Toxin abilities. My guess, and this is totally just off the top of my head, so it's based on, nothing but bad lifestyle decisions and a lack of sleep, is that as it was hinted that in this iteration Shriek's power set origins are unknown, whatever was giving her these powers transferred to Mulligan, and he'll become the ultimate symbiote hunter, perhaps even gaining the Toxin symbiote to make for the ultimate hybrid. Or he'll just be forgotten, I don't know. Bonus fun fact, Toxin was co-created by Peter Milligan, who I guess was having trouble with names that day. Oh, shoot. Okay, this isn't even in my script right now. I totally just remembered this. So, this is just an Easter egg for people who really liked Boardwalk Empire, but we have two Capones in this movie. We have Stephen Graham, who played Al Capone in Boardwalk Empire. He plays Detective Mulligan. And then we have Tom Hardy, who very recently, I think in 2019, also played Al Capone in the film Capone, which I really liked. And I'm like one of 5 people, but hey, that's just me. Anyway, back to the list as I wrote it out. I mentioned Shriek's eye. Yeah. She's also shot in the head by a cop in the comics, so that is very much in keeping with her origin. What's not in keeping is the breadth of her powers, including the power to tap into a person's psyche and control their emotions, which is so creepy and weird. I'm kind of bummed that she got bell stomped in the end. Now, being a Marvel property, one little Easter egg that I'm sure you and everyone else, Grandma included, noticed was that the late great Stan Lee pops up on the cover of a magazine, which was also seen in the trailer. Yeah, that's the entire entry. Another as seen in the trailer detail, which I didn't even connect until it was in my face for half the movie, was Eddie Brock's choice of clothing, which is either his midlife crisis leather jacket or his Detroit Lions jacket with the Mumford University t-shirt. Now, if you're an Eddie Murphy fan, you probably noticed that this is a take on Axel Foley's outfit in Beverly Hills Cop, albeit with a darker color scheme in keeping with Venom's appearance, since he is often hiding on Eddie as his boyfriend's, host's clothing in the comics. This was apparently one of many details added by co-writer and producer Tom Hardy, who just really likes Beverly Hills Cop. There's some pretty solid cameos in this film as well, with the most notable being rapper Little Simz, as seen in the rave sequence, in which Venom hits the town and calls for equality, while also saying he's out of Eddie's closet, making the gay subtext of their squabbling relationship basically just text. Anyway, Little Simz had previously released a song in 2019 entitled Venom, which fans suggested should be in the sequel. Well, it is in a remixed version over the credits, and she gets to act opposite the big boy himself, and hopefully this will catapult her career into the stratosphere. You know, because she released a mixtape called Stratosphere. You get it. Now, another musician whose cameo actually caused me a bit of confusion is Scroobius Pip, who is an English hip-hop artist and spoken-word poet who shows up briefly in 2 scenes as an inmate at Ravencroft named Siegfried. Now, why is that character given that name? No idea. As far as I know, the only characters from the comics with that name are like German soldiers and junk, so I don't know, I guess it just sounded cool, man. Future Alfred Pennyworth and former Gollum Andy Serkis directed this entry in Sony's Spider-Man universe, a name which just flows off the tongue like the works of Percy Shelley, doesn't it? And while I'm sure that's not news to you superfans out there, it did strike me as a fun parallel to his work in Lord of the Rings, where he, like Eddie Brock, often had conversations with his darker self. Obviously, he was hired partially for his extensive work in the world of motion capture, but I'd like to think some executive at Sony was like, yeah, let's just hire the dude who talks to himself all the time. Another tidbit you probably noticed because, oh boy, was it in your face, was the product placement in the film, including the likes of Ducati, and this being their property, plenty of Sony products, including a Sony Bravia TV, which Eddie assures Venom is just a great product. Of course, what does Venom destroy when they're having their little tiff, causing quite possibly the biggest emotional reaction from Eddie? Well, the motorcycle and the TV, because, consumerism. Now, there are a ton of instances of the Daily Bugle showing up in Let There Be Carnage, including plenty of physical editions, which don't appear to exist in the standard Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least as far as we've seen. You might also have noticed that Brock has a byline for the article on Cletus Cassidy that Shriek is reading in her cell, right before she, shrieks. This is presumably the piece that Eddie was writing when he met Cletus in the stinger for the first film, back when Cletus was going through his perm phase. Now, bonus entry for you non-comic fans, that version of Cassidy was more true to the comics, but after everyone laughed at the crappy fright wig poor Woody Harrelson had to wear, it was changed to another hairstyle that is certainly a choice. And, in a moment also called out when the trailer was released, if you look closely, Detective Mulligan's copy of the Bugle features an article that seems to show the words Avengers, Lose, and Nightmare. Is this alluding to the future downfall of the MCU's super team to the villain Nightmare? Probably not, but it sure makes for a good bit of clickbait, doesn't it? Oh, and did you guys make the connection between Venom 2 and Natural Born Killers? I'm not sure how deliberate this was, but the relationship between Cletus Cassidy and Shriek bears a striking resemblance to that of Mallory and Mickey in that Woody Harrelson starring film. Now, that couple also, they drive around in a red convertible, although in Venom, the car is a clear reference to the one driven by Cletus and Shriek in Carnage vs. Deadpool. So, you know, it's just layers, man. It's like an onion.
Makes me want to cry.
And if you were curious, the compound phenethylamine, if you're curious, the compound phenethylamine found in brains and chocolate is a real thing, and its inclusion is sourced from the comics. However, the movie misses out on one important detail. That phenethylamine is actually fairly common and is found in numerous meats, beans, seafoods, and certain dairy products. But hey, that wouldn't be as funny as brains and chocolate.
Do you feel me?
Now, this version of Carnage is a bit different from his comic book counterpart, something hardcore fans certainly picked up on. For one thing, his bond with Carnage is far from non-symbiotic in the comics. They're actually a kind of a perfect match. Made in hell! Also, his relationship with Shriek comes later from his prison break in Maximum Carnage, where they first meet and go on a crime spree. Now, this inclusion, aside from giving us a sick performance from Moneypenny herself, Naomi Harris, Happy Day, also helps to quell the more R-rated side of everyone's favorite red-headed cannibalistic serial killer. Instead of his motivation being purely to kill and up his body count, Cletus in this is, well, he's doing it for love. Now, whether this was done to give him more depth or to simply get a PG-13 is unknown, but I do know that one of those two things includes way more dollar signs. That Lethal Protector name, by the way, that Venom and Eddie use time and time again, well, that's the name of their 1993 comic book miniseries from when Venom went from villain to antihero. It was the first comic named after the character and gave us our first glimpse into Eddie's background. So, you know, if you want to be a little nerdly and just like correct people all the time, go read that. Lethal Protector was also the comic series partially adapted for the first Venom film, with notable appearances including villain Carlton Drake, the Life Foundation, and the symbiote Riot. This film doesn't really have much to do with that comic outside of dealing with the shift to anti-heroics and, well, the name drop. You know what? This is a filler entry. Moving on. One line that stood out in the trailer was Venom shouting, "That's a red one!" before hiding within Eddie. Now, it's not explained much in the film, but in the comics, the symbiote offspring are often much more powerful than their parents. As far as I can recall, there's not much reason for a red one to be any more powerful than another, but presumably this ties in with Venom realizing that as his offspring, Carnage is more deadly by default. Although who knows, maybe we'll get like some kind of like color system in future movies. I don't know. Now, Ravencroft Institute is another comics accurate element in Venom. As in the film, this is where the comic book version of Cletus Kasady was born, and it has served as a prison for various Marvel villains over the years. This is also where Cletus first meets Shriek. It was also featured in Amazing Spider-Man 2 as the place where Electro is experimented on by Dr. Ashley Kafka. You all remember that classic scene from that movie that everybody loves, right? Come on. Of course, in Venom, our chief doctor is none other than Dr. Camille Pazzo. Pazzo? It doesn't matter. Who is presented as a conservatively dressed older woman, which is pretty funny if you've read Carnage Unleashed, in which Dr. Pazzo is drawn, well, like a doctor in a 90s comic book. Along with Ravencroft, we also get St. Estes' Home for Unwanted Children, which in the comics is the St. Estes Home for boys, presumably changed to facilitate the Shriek relationship. Comics Carnage has his first encounter with Spidey in the burned ruins of St. Estes, which it's implied but not confirmed Cletus personally burned down. Meanwhile, in Venom 2, it's a bit more obvious who the culprit is. Going back to Carnage Unleashed, that series also features Carnage essentially hacking computers, in that case in order to travel through the video game based on his life, and I promise I'm not making this up, attack people through the internet. The 90s, man, it was a wild time. Meanwhile, in this film, he does the, I guess more realistic swordfish style hacking in order to find Shriek. Oh, and hey, remember that dog that we didn't see little Cletus kill with a power drill, but he definitely killed with a power drill? Yeah, that also happens in the flashbacks in Carnage Unleashed. Lots of Carnage Unleashed in this movie, actually. There's even a song in the soundtrack titled Carnage Unleashed. Anyway, him throwing Granny down the stairs is also featured, but who cares about that old dame? Did you know that the dog's name is Fifi? Well, now you do, and that little pooch got treated like a wooden board at Habitat for Humanity. Okay, one more from Carnage Unleashed. You know that quick scene where Cletus and Carnage are talking in the car and make an agreement to kill Venom and Eddie, and then Carnage just yeets a truck off the bridge for seemingly no reason? Yeah, that might be a reference to the moment where Dr. Pazzo saves a school bus on a bridge from being run off by Carnage, thereby sending their truck careening off said bridge. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's also really specific, and they're already taking so much from that comic. Like, it has to be, right? Right? Come on. Oh, you know what? Actually, that scene might have also been a reference to the ending of Interview with the Vampire.
I've had to listen to that for centuries.
Probably not, but I just came up in my noggin there. Anyway, finally, number 25. Shoot.
I'm starving. So eat those guys.
I can't. Sonny and Cher are best friends.
Hey, you youngins in the audience. Venom's pet chickens are named after Sonny and Cher, who were a prominent musical duo in the long, long ago of the 1970s. Will we potentially see a sequel in which Sonny the Chicken becomes the first poultry elected to Congress? Maybe.
I think we can all agree that Free Guy is the surprisingly wholesome hit of the summer. I mean, when you imagine a heartwarming actor, the star of Deadpool and The Hitman's Bodyguard doesn't really jump to mind. His newest blockbuster hit packs all the same punch as Deadpool, but with video game jokes instead of comic book jokes, and a surprisingly sweet screenplay. If you need another excuse to go see the film again, there are all sorts of Easter eggs and cameos the movie probably snuck past you. Let's take a look.
Sunday should be warm and sunny, just a scattering of drive-bys.
Does anyone find it surprising how Disney-fied the final action sequence was? I don't mean like Disney, Princess Disney. I'm talking Marvel, Star Wars will probably buy the entire world one day Disney. The big showdown between Guy and Dude featured Captain America's shield, Hulk's fist, and a lightsaber. Well, the story behind the sequence is that Disney was in the process of purchasing 20th Century Fox while the movie was filming. The filmmakers behind Free Guy asked if they could use any weapons from Disney's vast arsenal. Disney enthusiastically said yes. While any other year I would have found this awesome, after having to sit through Space Jam: A New Legacy, I'm starting to worry that all of our big budget movies are just gonna be commercials for other big budget movies. Towards the beginning of the movie, something happened that made me doubt my mutant ability to pick out any celebrity's voice. Yeah, I have that. When Molotov was getting info from the player in that alley, I knew I could recognize that voice. I leaned over to my friend and gave my guess, and she rejected the idea. She said it was ridiculous. Then I got home, I got on IMDb, and it was proved I was right. The player was none other than Wolverine himself, Hugh Jackman. Apparently, he was able to put aside his totally real and not at all joke feud with Ryan Reynolds to record a quick voiceover role.
Ryan Reynolds is a complete and total
If you're not a gamer, you might not be able to tell what game Free Guy is heavily based off of. Anyone who's played GTA Online for more than 10 seconds knows that most of the players are some sort of twisted combination of John Wick's combat skills and the Joker's sense of mercy. I mean that as a compliment, by the way. Free Guy is the closest way of simulating the experience of playing the game for the first time at level 0. While the gameplay is clearly based off the latest Grand Theft Auto, the city itself is based on Liberty City, most popular in GTA 4. Hopefully this movie's critical acclaim can get us that GTA movie that we have been waiting for. Free Guy was full of surprise cameos from actors who clearly wanted to work with Ryan Reynolds. The best of these cameos was Chris Evans, who got angry at Guy for using his Captain America shield. I mean, hey, if you want to get all technical about it, it's Anthony Mackie's Captain America shield now, but whatever. So how did Free Guy manage to score Steve Rogers himself? Well, apparently it was a lot easier than you'd think. Ryan Reynolds evidently wrote Evans a simple email asking if he was interested. Chris managed to squeeze in just enough time to film the role in his busy schedule. This seems to be Ryan's superpower, as he was able to score Brad Pitt for Deadpool 2 with just a cup of coffee. When Guy first gets his glasses, his eyes are opened to the great wide world of power-ups, missions, and cool shoes that make you jump like Spider-Man. One item that he saw highlighted was a bottle of gin that was labeled blatant product placement. This is a reference to the aviation gin company Ryan Reynolds is known for making viral videos for. While he sold the company for reportedly a cool $610 million, it's still a great dig at the star's YouTube fame. Clearly, Ryan Reynolds alone is an advertising genius. He's worth the entire cast of Mad Men. Yeah, that's right. Take that, Don Draper. Is there any actor out there cooler than Ryan Reynolds? Yes, there is, and his name is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
You know, before this, I used to work in an orange juice factory, but I got canned.
The Jungle Cruise and Jumanji star is not only just as big a name as Reynolds, but the two have apparently become good friends. The two worked together on the Fast and the Furious spin-off Hobbs and Shaw. Apparently, Johnson and Reynolds became good enough pals that The Rock voiced one of the bank robbers. They recently filmed the Netflix movie Red Notice together, alongside Wonder Woman herself, Gal Gadot, and here I was thinking Free Guy had an all-star cast. Actors are well known for putting on massive amounts of muscle for a film role. Christian Bale famously went from the emaciated Trevor Resnick in The Machinist to freaking Batman in Batman Begins. Even Bale couldn't match up to Ryan Reynolds physically transforming himself for the same movie. Free Guy not only sees Reynolds pack on about 100 pounds of muscle, but apparently a few feet of height too. How was he able to get Hulk-sized and then slim back down during filming? Well, he didn't. CGI was used to take Ryan's face and put it over actor Aaron W. Reed's. That has not kept Reynolds from having a great deal of fun with his new persona online. The stash house in Free Guy is a pivotal sequence in the movie. While the mission that Molotov and Guy go on mostly has generic henchmen for the pair to fight, midway through the scene, an Avenger-style team of gaming archetypes attacks them. You've got your cowboy from Red Dead Redemption 2, your ninja from the likes of Ninja Gaiden, samurai from games like Ghost of Tsushima, and a Viking warrior like one from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Personally, I'm disappointed that they couldn't have thrown in at least one Italian plumber, huh? Maybe a gorilla with a tie for the pair to fight? Jodie Comer is blowing up right now. Aside from playing Millie Molotov in Free Guy, the Killing Eve star will appear alongside Adam Driver, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck in The Last Duel later in 2021. The actress's pedigree definitely came into play during the film's marketing. My favorite ad for the movie was the one that featured Comer and Reynolds sitting together. The subtitles beneath Comer's name highlighted all of her various awards and nominations, angering Ryan because he didn't have any.
Do we need to put the Emmy winner thing there every time? I mean, usually it's just at the beginning.
Really, though? Is a BAFTA award or an Emmy that much better than a Teen Choice Award? You know, maybe don't answer that. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds are one of the hottest couples in Hollywood. So it's no surprise that Free Guy would pay homage to the star's famous wife and her most infamous role. While Blake Lively is a big Hollywood star today, she got her start on Gossip Girl, where she starred as Serena van der Woodsen. Serena was referenced in Free Guy by a player who used her look as a character skin. If there's one Hollywood actor who has made a lovable presence on YouTube that compares to Ryan Reynolds, it's John Krasinski. The Office star and host of Some Good News was one of the many stars to make a vocal cameo for the film. He was one of the various gamers in the film, though I couldn't really tell you which one. Hopefully he talks about the experience on Some Good News when it inevitably comes back. He just has to finish up with stupid Jack Ryan first. If I asked 99 gamers what the greatest weapon in all of gaming history was, yeah, I'd probably get 99 different answers. And then 99 different debates between those gamers explaining why their choice of weapon was ridiculous. For my money at least, the portal gun from Portal is the coolest weapon I've ever used. Creating two portals that connect to one another across space made for one of the greatest puzzle games ever made. While apparently the makers of Free Guy agreed with me, because the portal gun is the most repeated direct video game reference in the entire film. It's kinda sad that our first big screen adaptation of the portal gun was for a movie that wasn't a Portal film.
Yo, my Free City bros, Antoine here.
It's a proven fact at this point that every movie is made better with a little Taika Waititi. Free Guy is no exception, with the famed director taking on the film's villain, Antoine. For the film's marketing, Reynolds and Waititi remarked how weird it was that they'd never done a movie together.
And now to finally have a chance to work together for the first time ever in both of our lives.
This is an obvious joke on the fact that they were both in the ill-fated Green Lantern movie Reynolds loves to make fun of. To be honest though, Antoine isn't my favorite Waititi role. It just seemed unrealistically evil to me. I mean, when has a video game developer ever lied to his customers, sold a shoddy sequel for profit, bought an indie studio just to gut it, verbally abused his employees, or caused a scene? It's so unrealistic. Celebrities come in all sorts of different forms nowadays. While Free Guy was full of movie star celebrities, it also stacked up plenty of gaming celebrities from YouTube and Twitch. Streamers and personalities like Ninja, Pokimane, Laserbeam, Jacksepticeye, and Dan TDM all appear in the film. I mean, I think Video Game Donkey would have been a better choice for a Ryan Reynolds movie, but that's just me. If there's a modern game known for free-for-all carnage as much as GTA Online, it's Fortnite. The Battle Royale sensation was clearly a favorite of the makers of Free Guy. The game makes fun of its silly power-ups, dance moves, and Twitch streaming popularity. The most overt reference to the game I found was when Molotov and Guy jumped off of his motorcycle when they were making their escape. Molotov summoned a glider, very, very clearly from Fortnite. Apparently, Antoine managed to purchase Epic Games along with Millie's studio. No wonder he's got such an ego. While Free Guy loved to reference video games or name drop them, it didn't really show too many. For the most part, it liked to pretend that Free City was the only game anyone in the world was playing, kind of like Ready Player One. The big exception to that is the Ubisoft game Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which has a brief cameo in the movie. Perhaps bumping into the oppressive barrier at the edge of the game's enormous map is what inspired the barrier that served as the game's big climax. I've always wondered what's beyond those barriers, and now I know. Another game entirely. One of the greatest ways man has ever come up with to shoot rocket launchers at your friends in a safe way is the classic Halo series. Clearly, the player versus player carnage that Halo helped to popularize was a big influence on Free Guy. Most notably, the Scorpion tank, which is a staple of the series, drove across Free City alongside the various other tanks and sporting cars cruising along the streets. One of the best lines in the entire movie is when a mother of one of the gamers openly complains about how God clearly doesn't exist because her son still lives at home. While you can't see the mom's face, I knew there was a reason why this delivery was so perfect. That's because she was voiced by the SNL and 30 Rock star Tina Fey.
I already have a drink. Do you think you'd buy me mozzarella sticks?
It's no wonder that line got so many laughs from my theater, considering it came from one of the funniest women in Hollywood. Now, I just need a movie starring Ryan Reynolds and Tina Fey in leading roles. That is just an instant classic in the making. Ryan Reynolds, like his character Deadpool, is a proud Canadian. There are many Canadian celebrities out there, but few who have been as successful as the Jeopardy host Alex Trebek. He managed to host the series for 37 wonderful years until pancreatic cancer took him away from the show. His final appearance as the show's host was actually in Free Guy, with him playing himself. It's appropriate that it came out in the same week that Jeopardy announced its new hosts, Mayim Bialik and Mike Richards. Of course, it would have been better if they announced LeVar Burton, but they didn't ask me. I'm sure I wasn't the only one shocked when the movie opened up with none other than Channing Tatum as a gamer in Free City. It shocked me because keeping such a big movie star a secret during the film's marketing is such an unusual and refreshing choice nowadays. The more we saw Tatum, the more it was clear that his casting was perfect. Mwah! He's most known for movies like Magic Mike and Step Up that show off his dancing moves. This was the perfect way to make fun of the modern trend of including cheesy dancing emotes in online games. I also loved his name, Revenjamin Buttons. Come on, that is a fantastic reference to the very serious film, The Curious Case of Benjamin Buttons. Revenjamin Buttons, though, is just so much better. While Free Guy clearly exists in a fictional universe, there are a few references to the real world. One of the biggest was a direct shout out to the famous gaming website IGN. While most movies would make up a new website that would be IGN adjacent, Free Guy actually manages to score the site's logo. So obviously I'm campaigning for Screen Rant to be used in Deadpool 3, come on! I think that Joe Keery is one of the biggest and most surprising success stories to come out of Stranger Things. While Keery Steve was kind of insufferable in the show's first season, he was the fan favorite by the end of the show's third. So naturally, he was a perfect addition to the Free Guy as Keys. His apartment is full of cool stuff, but by far the coolest is the neon Pac-Man ghost that I am very jealous of. It's kind of surprising that he didn't have at least one Stranger Things poster, considering the fact that director Sean Levy also worked on the show. I'm sure there was quite a lot of debate about which video game characters should be referenced in Free Guy. While the list could have easily included Mario, Donkey Kong, Sonic, Kirby, Solid Snake, or Master Chief, Free Guy made the strange but awesome choice to make a big reference to the Blue Bomber himself, Mega Man. In the scene where Guy finally gets to show off his skills from that leveling up montage, he pulls a very familiar blue gun from behind his back. That would be, of course, Mega Man's legendary Buster gun. I mean, not to be picky, but it would have been a lot cooler if he charged the shot first, but I guess I'll take what I can get. There are few surprise weapons that were quite as game-changing as Half-Life 2's gravity gun. Oh, my bad, I'm sorry. The zero-point energy field manipulator. It was the perfect way for Valve to show off their revolutionary physics system. So, it was a perfect inclusion into a movie that celebrated gaming as much as Free Guy. I'm just glad that the movie did not include any head crabs. Director Sean Levy has had a varied, successful career with films like Night at the Museum, Date Night, Real Steel, and The Internship. As much as I enjoy those films, I think Free Guy is likely his best work yet. Well, apparently Ryan Reynolds agreed because he signed on to join Levy's next film, The Adam Project. After such a long time, the wait is finally over for Black Widow. At last, the film answered all of our lingering questions about Black Widow's origin. Of course, this being Marvel, the only way that you could truly get all of her story is if you were an eagle-eyed comic book nerd who had read a lot of Black Widow comics, and luckily for you, that's exactly what we train our agents to do. Let's go. If you're anything like me, the one part of Nat's story that we were dying to know about was that legendary Budapest story that she referenced in the Avengers while her and Clint were fighting off those alien invaders. While we didn't get the flashback scene that I specifically asked Kevin Feige for, we got the next best thing. If you look really closely, you can make out how the whole thing went down. In the Budapest apartment, there are arrow markings on the wall that imply he and Nat fought there. We know that Clint got the order to take her out but made a different call. She ended up defecting, and in order to prove herself, she and Clint blew up Dreykov's building. This led to a massive battle through the streets of Budapest that apparently resembled a Chitauri army, at least to Nat, that is. The two then hid together an event where we could see that they spent their time playing tic-tac-toe, hangman, and becoming best friends. It would be so sweet if her little sister weren't trying to track him down to avenge her. In the original Avengers, Loki gives about as much of Natasha's backstory we would get for years. He made Clint spill all the beans about all of her greatest sins, or the red in her ledger. Among the many horrible things that Natasha had done in her career for both S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Red Room, the worst seemed to have something to do with Dreykov's daughter. Now we've learned that Nat tried to take out both Dreykov and his daughter as collateral damage in order to defect. This failed and allowed Dreykov to slink into the shadows. His daughter, meanwhile, went on to become the Taskmaster. That certainly is a lot of red in her ledger. There's one really quick line in Black Widow that references one more part of Marvel's Russian stories. Yelena mistakenly calls Alexei the Crimson Dynamo instead of Red Guardian. Crimson Dynamo was actually a villain in Marvel Comics. Whereas Red Guardian was the Russian Captain America, Crimson Dynamo was like the Russian Iron Man. He was thrown into a blender with the character Whiplash for Ivan Vanko in Iron Man 2. That being said, there were several Crimson Dynamos in the comics, so we could see one pop up in Armor Wars when Rhodey finally gets his own solo series. Yelena was a surprisingly fun character, wasn't she? While the trailers certainly showed off her chops as an action star, they did not let us know that she would be cracking us up every other scene. Remember when Nat said beep beep in Age of Ultron? I always imagined the Widows to be just a little strange, like someone who hasn't been around people much and mumbles to themselves and stuff, you know? Just kind of weird, but in a good way. Her best running gag by far concerned the first clothing item that she ever purchased, her jacket that had a ton of pockets. It turns out that this jacket was hiding in front of us the entire time. Natasha was actually wearing Yelena's jacket during Infinity War. I hope she got it back. In one of the cutest sequences that we see in the entire series, we see that Natasha had a secret love of James Bond movies. How big of a fan was she? Well, she could quote Roger Moore's Moonraker line by line, so I'd say a pretty big fan. Moonraker wasn't just chosen to show Natasha's hobbies, though. That movie ends with Bond fighting a giant floating base that looked a lot like Dreykov's Red Room base. I'm just glad that she did not have Scarlet Witch's powers, or she would have made a small town live out a series of Bond films over and over, like in WandaVision. The opening sequence of Black Widow spent a lot of time showing just how deep Dreykov's influence went. How did they pull this off so quickly? They used the old Forrest Gump tactic of inserting him next to real-life historical figures. Instead of the likes of JFK and Nixon, Dreykov was placed next to leaders like President Bill Clinton and President Vladimir Putin. What's kind of funny is that all of those historical figures are now canon in the MCU. Taskmaster might be one of the most intimidating villains we've seen since the Winter Soldier first showed off his knife trick against Cap. While the comic character is a villain named Anthony Masters, the MCU version is revealed to be Antonia Dreykov. While that was a pretty big change, how Taskmaster fought remained the same. Every single move Antonia made was a reference to other MCU fighters like Black Panther, Hawkeye, Captain America, or even Natasha herself. What's sad is I've probably seen that airport fight scene from Civil War more times than Antonia, and I cannot do any of those moves. We all need friends like Rick Mason. Natasha's very own independent contractor came through for her across the movie with any safe house or secondhand helicopter that he could find. It probably won't surprise you that Mason is another spy character in the comics, known as the Agent. Seeing as he'll pretty much work for anyone, it would not be surprising if Mason starts showing up all over the place like Jimmy Woo or Coulson. It's kind of a funny coincidence that the woman who ended up playing Nat's adopted mother was none other than Rachel Weisz. Not only would she have been a top contender to play Natasha Romanoff in the late 90s, but she's married to current Bond actor Daniel Craig. According to her, at one point, both Black Widow and No Time to Die were scheduled to release the same weekend. While they were having a summit meeting about it online, Craig was literally walking around behind them as Kevin Feige was discussing how to handle the Bond movie problem. Evidently, Weisz really wanted to say, well, he's right here, you can ask him. Black Widow's mission statement was to answer every single question about Nat's life that we've ever asked, and apparently some that we didn't. The movie ended with Mason acquiring the special Quinjet team Cap uses in Infinity War to save Wanda and Vision before flying to both Avengers HQ and Wakanda. I didn't know that we were going to get the jet's origin story too, but now I'm really interested where it ended up, or what used Quinjet dealership Mason bought it off of. If there was something very familiar to you about that car chase scene with Taskmaster, that was no accident. The sequence was clearly modeled after the legendary chase scene from one of the greatest action movies of all time, Terminator 2. Not only does it have similar action beats, but even the score references some of the best moments from the chase. If Taskmaster does come back for another adventure, hopefully she keeps the Terminator references coming. Someone has to, now that Bucky's no longer Marvel's resident Terminator, the Winter Soldier. Okay, I've got to come clean. While Black Widow definitely lived up to the hype, there was one thing I was hoping for that did not come. A cameo by Clint Barton. Well, a physical cameo, I mean. Jeremy Renner did have a brief vocal cameo talking to Nat through her earpiece during the Budapest mission.
We need confirmation Dreykov's in the building.
While I would have loved to see the entire Budapest story play out with both Nat and Clint, at least we got a little taste of it. Though, I wouldn't mind if they showed it all during the Hawkeye Disney Plus show coming out later this year, huh? Just saying, Disney, there's still time. If it seemed weird to you that Black Widow made an abrupt costume change to a white supersuit during Alexi's breakout, it's because it was a reference to one of the film's favorite Black Widow comic runs. In the series Black Widow Deadly Origin, Natasha is seen wearing the now iconic white uniform as snow camouflage, though it definitely came in handier during that story. It may have been snowy where Alexei was locked up, but they didn't do any covert ops in the snow. I'm not sure the bright white suit really did her any favors fighting in a prison, but hey, I'm not the super spy Avenger. One of the best scenes in the film was when Alexei was arm wrestling literally everyone in prison while telling tall tales about his time as the Soviet superhero, the Red Guardian. While one prisoner was not very impressed with his stories, the massive prisoner known as the Great Bear took issue with the timeline of Alexei's story about taking on the still frozen Captain America. Well, in the comics, the Great Bear was another Russian superhero who actually resembled a big bear. I would say that there's still time for him to become a hero like his counterpart, but I don't think that arm of his is going to be fighting anyone ever again. If Alexei's stories weren't enough to keep the other prisoners entertained, his vast collection of tattoos probably do. His entire body is covered in Soviet propaganda, ideology, and references to his superhero past. I mean, his fists have Karl and Marx tattooed on them. What I find interesting is how reminiscent the tats are to another Marvel character, Ivan Vanko. Is it possible that Ivan and Alexei were tatted up by the same prison artist? According to my headcanon, they were. While discussing the experiments done upon the widows, Melina dropped a line that should be very interesting to Marvel fans eager to hear anything that hints at the X-Men. She stated directly that girls were passed through the program if they had some sort of genetic potential. This is very reminiscent of the language Hydra used to describe Wanda Maximoff when they were experimenting on her. Could this line be another brick Marvel is laying for the foundation of the mutants? I certainly hope so. That mind-controlled super soldier stick is awfully close to the Weapon X program, don't you think? Melina may have gotten the least attention of the Widow family, but that doesn't mean that there is not a lot of untapped potential for the character. In the comics, she was a super spy by the name of Iron Maiden who always lived in the shadow of Black Widow's greatness. This led to them clashing on more than one occasion. Melina's Iron Maiden mask is shown in her weapons room for a brief second, hinting that more action may be coming in her future. Something tells me we will see her put that mask on in a movie or a TV show sometime soon. Black Widow begins with Natasha's fake family completing their mission in America. Apparently, they were there to infiltrate something called the North Institute. This was apparently the Hydra base where they experimented on Bucky to master the tech used to control his mind. This institute was based on real experiments the CIA conducted on mind control, Project MK Ultra. Chances are that we'll see the mind control room the Institute patented again at some point in the MCU. It's worked pretty well for Hydra and the Red Room, so who knows who will be using it next. It seems right that Black Widow's origin story would feature all of Natasha's greatest hits since 2010. She used her standard interrogation tactic that worked on Loki, where she puts on a sad face and makes the villain monologue out his plan without realizing it. She even ended her interrogation of Dreykov with the same "thank you for your cooperation" line. Not only that, but in the same scene, she used the cool Mission Impossible face mask she used in Winter Soldier. Most importantly, there's the infamous Black Widow pose that Yelena makes fun of her for before trying it out herself. I mean, it is a pretty cool pose. If you loved Black Widow and all you want is more, well, you are in luck. The movie is heavily based on the story Black Widow: Deadly Origins. This is the story of how Romanoff became the legendary Black Widow. It goes through her childhood and sends her on an adventure that sees her past and present colliding. The easiest way to get more Marvel action is to go right to the source. Alexei really hates Captain America. The only thing he hates more than his Western super soldier competition is that he never got a chance to fight him. This in and of itself is a reference to the comics. The Red Guardian is often depicted as a Captain America villain. The two have fought many times in the comics, just how Alexei always wanted. Frankly, I think the MCU version got off easy. We didn't get to see him in his prime, but it's pretty clear that Steve would have obliterated him. I don't know if Alexei would have ever gotten over it. There was something very familiar about the opening sequence of Black Widow. That's because Nat was apparently living out the plotline of one of my favorite shows of all time, The Americans. Just like with Nat's childhood, the famous FX series dealt with a sleeper agent family that posed as Americans while spying for the KGB. Both were based on real-life stories of sleeper agents that lived in the US. So if the opening sequence really spoke to you, try The Americans out, or look up stories of the real-life spy families who lived out this Avenger's life. The end credits sequence for Black Widow revealed that Yelena was now working for a shadowy figure played by none other than Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Thanks to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we know that she's actually Contessa Valentina Allegra de la Fontaine, sometimes known as Madame Hydra. She has also recruited John Walker to be her US agent for purposes that we don't know yet. Could she be forming her own Dark Avengers? Well, I'm pretty sure we're gonna find out when Yelena goes after Clint and Hawkeye later this year. Despite the fact that we meet Natasha's fake parents in Black Widow, there's very little we or Nat ever learn about them. The film reveals that her mother was actually taken out and buried in an unmarked grave by Dreykov. Nat doesn't learn about her father until years later when the Red Skull informs her that she is the daughter of Ivan. While this is most likely a reference to Ivan Petrovich from Black Widow's origin story, some MCU fans think it may be referring to Iron Man 2's Ivan Vanko instead. Frankly, I just don't see the family resemblance. Obviously, there is one Black Widow mystery that has been driving Marvel fans wild more than any other. When did Black Widow dye her hair blonde? I know. Thankfully, Marvel decided to answer the question by showing Nat with a box of hair dye at the beginning of the movie. By the film's end, she has the look she sports throughout Infinity War. Now, if they'll only answer my questions about when she got her hair straightened before Winter Soldier. I mean, the people need answers, Marvel.
It's out with the old and in with the new in The Suicide Squad, but in this wild and crazy world with dudes with detachable arms, dudes who should just compete in the Olympics, and polka-dotted people with parental problems, there's a whole lot going on, so let's take a look at some of the things you may have missed. Oh, and spoilers, like a whole bunch of them. Let's start off with one of, if not the most important pieces of Suicide Squad history. This guy here. Now, I know he may just look like a prison doctor who may enjoy his job a little too much, but he's being played by John Ostrander, who is the creator of the second and modern version of the Suicide Squad, or Task Force X if you want to get serious about it. John launched the Suicide Squad solo comic in '87 and is responsible for creating DC's Waldorf Warden, Amanda Waller, with Lynn Wein and John Byrne. He's also worked on Marvel comics like Heroes for Hire, X-Men, and The Punisher, which makes this cameo even cooler by immortalizing such an influential comics writer. Now onto a character that is not so influential or helpful or even cool, the Detachable Kid. Now, if you've never heard of him, and why would you have, it's because he's kind of a new character and kind of not. So in the comics, there is no character named TDK, and why would the DC fandom lie to me? There is, however, a character from Secret Origins Volume 2 that has abilities so similar that this just has to be a reimagining of the character. That character's name is Arm Fall Off Boy. Yes, that is the name he chose to go with, which means that any idea given the right circumstances can work. Take that however you want to. Now, there are enough differences to make them distinct, such as Arm Fall Off Boy actually being a hero, even if it is below F tier, and being from the 31st century, but there's no way TDK and AFOB, yeah, that doesn't actually have a good ring to it, aren't the same character with slight changes that are almost inconsequential. Another character that would be lucky to have their name written on a piece of paper somewhere in Arkham is Kaleidoscope. She first debuted in a Superboy comic from 1982 and hasn't been seen or heard from since. You'll be able to find her right before Waller takes Peacemaker and Bloodsport to meet Ratcatcher 2. She's the one who looks like Stained Glass Girl, who I hope is not a real character. With her being so niche and unremarkable, has actually made some people think that she's a gender swap version of Crazy Quilt, which is yet again a character that you'd be forgiven for thinking is a joke, and I mean, he is, but if you look during the credits, you'll see Kaleidoscope right above our next super weird character. Also, during our tour of Belle Reve, we meet this guy, Double Down, a man who got powers from having a cursed deck of cards bonded to his skin. Now, as a person that likes Gambit and is still waiting on that Channing Tatum-led movie that will absolutely never happen, I enjoy characters using cards with their powers as much as the next guy, but this is a little much even for me. What's next? A guy that only commits crimes on certain days of the month? Unfortunately, yes, that is next. In the same scene, right next to him in fact, is Calendar Man, a man who commits crimes based on holidays. You think that would make him really easy to catch since you know when the next crime is gonna happen, but hey, Batman's the world's greatest detective, not me. While Calendar Man has somehow made his way into multiple Batman stories, most notably The Long Halloween, even though his MO is silly, Calendar Man has proven himself to be a dangerous member of the Bats Row Gallery. He's also being played by Sean Gunn, who often appears in his brother's movies, either for mocap like with the nightmare that is Weasel, or standard acting like with Kraglin in both Guardians movies. When we get introduced to Bloodsport, unlike some other characters, he seems to be doing his very best to stay out of trouble and just serve a sentence for putting Superman in the intensive care unit by putting a kryptonite needle right next to his pectorals. What you might not know is that this is a legit plot point in a Superman comic from 1987, and while this is the only real thing Bloodsport does before he faces a similar fate to Supes, only he doesn't survive. By the end of the movie though, Bloodsport seems to at least be a little reformed, and with him no longer under Waller's grasp, at least for now, hopefully he can stay out of any more Superman-related conflict. Right after the first Suicide Squad leave to go to Corto Maltese, back at Belle Reve, a bunch of people, honestly looks like the entire team, are betting on who they think is going to survive the mission. For fans of the Merc with the Mouth, this is how he got his name. Not Merc with a Mouth, it's Deadpool. I'm talking about Deadpool. When Deadpool the movie first came out, James was extremely supportive and was very outspoken on why he thought the movie worked, while also cautioning movie studios to not learn the wrong lesson about what made that movie so good. It's no secret that James is a huge Deadpool fan, so by putting an actual Deadpool in the movie is another great way to show his love for the character. In more DC-related fare, in the scene where Waller is practicing her putting skills while her team is off, doing Task Force X stuff, she mentions a Senator Cray. Now, as a well-connected political operative, this just seems like a throwaway line about a random dude in Congress, but Senator Cray is important because he's the father of Adam Cray, who would later take over the Atom from Ray Palmer. Adam the Atom in the comics has worked with the Suicide Squad even though his father was unalived by Deadshot, who's also on the team. As this movie showed, Waller seems to always have a plan B ready to go, so for the new Suicide Squad, maybe we can get a look into Cray's short-lived time as the Mini Molecular Man. Jotunheim, not to be mistaken with the land of the Frost Giants, I know, it's very easy to get that mixed up, is taken straight from Task Force X's very first mission in Ostrander's run. The specifics of the mission are vastly different. No intergalactic telepathic starfish or a scientific Hellraiser in that one, but the name and general idea of the Suicide Squad going in to destroy a World War II era German-built facility is the same. At this point, it's pretty easy to see how much of a love letter this movie is to Ostrander and his work, and the way some of his initial ideas were reinvented to fit in Gunn's wild interpretation is a sight to see. Another reference to that fateful, although somewhat uneventful in the grand scheme of things, first mission comes during the debrief scene. You know, the one where Peacemaker uses his knowledge of slang to potentially deduce a connection between the codename of the Starro Project. Well, that's straight from the comics. Not what starfish can mean in an anatomical context, but the debrief in a small theater room. It plays out the exact same way, with Waller only giving some of the information related to the mission while showing a slideshow of important people and location. There isn't a joke about an overhead projector though. Not sure what tech was outdated in the 80s to fill in for that though. Maybe like an abacus or something. A reference to a non-superhero franchise comes in the form of Bloodsport's helmet. Instead of the bandana that the Dubois incarnation of the character wore, Bloodsport's headgear in this movie seems a little more otherworldly. Some might even say alien. Now there is no in-continuity reason, at least that I was able to get from the movie, but his helmet looks to be a very clear reference to the xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. If you want to go deep in the crates, since there was a Batman vs. Predator comic in 1992, and we know through the critically lauded Alien vs. Predator in 2004 that everyone loved, that those characters are in the same universe, which means that there is a chance, however small, that Bloodsport could have seen a xenomorph somehow and decided to model his helmet after that. Why he wouldn't model it after a Predator when he's a mercenary is kind of weird, but hey, I'm not here to judge. Now back to a comic reference that you don't have to do mental gymnastics to justify. Let's talk about Rick Flag. When we're introduced to him in the movie, he's wearing your standard military guy garb, but once he rejoins the team after having some nice tea with the locals, we see him sporting a yellow t-shirt with a cartoon on it. That yellow shirt, sans cartoon, is a reference to his comic version where he wears that same shirt all the time. At least he was able to wear his favorite color before having one of the worst days you could possibly have. Let's shift to some more fun references. While the movie lingers on the keychain enough to be noticed, you may not know exactly what it's a reference to. The keychain is of a character named Mafalda, which is a comic strip character like the ones in the newspapers. Remember those? She was incredibly popular in the 60s and 70s in Latin America, and since Corto Maltese is a small island off the coast of South America, it would make sense for her to pop up there. It also makes sense as a reference since she's in the truck driven by Milton, who's a part of the resistance, as Mafalda was designed to represent the Argentinian middle class and progressive youth. She also looks like Little Lulu from comic strips in the 30s, but most notably from her show back in the 90s, although there doesn't actually seem to be a connection between the two characters, which is weird. But go watch the Little Lulu show though, highly recommended. As this is a James Gunn directed movie, he made sure to get some of the cast from his work with the other multi-million-dollar franchise of weirdo misfits that shouldn't work, but somehow work together. So starting off, we have Michael Rooker, who played Mary Poppins in both Guardians of the Galaxy movies as Savant. We've already talked about Sean Gunn as Calendar Man, Sylvester Stallone, who plays Stakar in Guardians 2 as King Shark, Nathan Fillion, who played TDK, had a cameo as this blue guy in the first Guardians, and there's even a cameo by Pom Klementieff, who played Mantis in Guardians 2 as a singer/dancer in the bar in Corto Maltese. Even one of the rats used on set was named Crisp Rat, which has to be a play on Chris Pratt, who of course played the honorless thief, Star-Lord. But the Guardians aren't the only MCU connections that this movie has. Idris Elba was Heimdall, the all-seeing god for multiple Thor movies, as well as his appearance in Infinity War. Taika Waititi, known for the lovable and cuddly rock monster Korg, first seen in his MCU directorial debut, Thor Ragnarok, plays Ratcatcher in this one. And to round this out, David Dastmalchian, who played Kurt in both Ant-Man movies, played Polka Dot Man in this. With all this cross-pollination between franchises, we might even get to see that DC vs. Marvel comic storyline on the big screen. I can't even say that with a straight face. Since Watchmen has been folded into the DC landscape with Doomsday Clock in 2017, this next one is technically an in-house reference. When Peacemaker touches Rick Flag's heart during their fight, Rick says, "Peacemaker, what a joke." Now this incarnation of Peacemaker has multiple parallels with the comedian, like having a very specific way of looking at things like freedom and justice, as well as being ultra-violent. Comedian, however, was created as a sort of parody of Peacemaker pre-going crazy, so it's interesting that Peacemaker has come full circle and fully becoming the thing that was being made fun of. Here's a smaller blink and you'll miss it moment. Once the day is saved and the rest of the world learn about Task Force X's exploits in Corto Maltese, in the scene where Bloodsport's daughter is watching the news, the network shown is GBS, which stands for Galaxy Broadcasting System, which actually isn't a Guardians of the Galaxy reference. I mean, I guess it could be, but GBS is an offshoot of Galaxy Communications run by Morgan Edge, who has connections to Darkseid. Yeah, I know it's weird that this regular dude has a line to Apocalypse, but remember that Darkseid once worked at McDonald's, so anything's possible. Another moment that is incredibly easy to miss happens during the bar scene right when our anti-heroes come in. Peacemaker, in his way of making peace with the locals, bumps this guy. Now I know he looks like some random old dude, but he's Lloyd Kaufman, co-founder of Troma Entertainment, where James Gunn first got his start with Tromeo and Juliet. With James so firmly set in his career now, it was nice to see him get a nod. Also, you can see him looking incredibly sad on the dance floor. Less fun, but hey, it do be like that sometimes. In a more positive moment of character growth, once the team gets Thinker and lets him know the plan, Harley says that if we find out you have personalized license plates, you die, which is a reference to 2016's Suicide Squad, where the Joker has a vanity plate that says ha 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 on it. Good on her for realizing that vanity plates are almost always a red flag. So we've talked about Corto Maltese a lot in this video already, but did you know that Corto Maltese is also the name of a series of comics named after its protagonist? Corto Maltese started in 1967 and is all about the exploits of a sea captain during the early decades of the 1900s. Corto Maltese in DC Comics was first mentioned in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and the whole storyline in this movie, where the US government sends in a Black Ops team to depose a government, is similar, but they just sent Superman in for Miller's story, and I think you know how simple that one was for him. In the movie, there's a lot of different needle drops featuring various songs that give you a sense on what the characters are feeling, but what's interesting about all of them but one song is that they're all diegetic. That means that the songs are heard by the characters in the movie while we hear them too. The only one where that isn't true is the song that plays during Harley's breakout scene. The music isn't actually coming from anywhere, but considering how quirky Harley is, you could definitely just say that she's singing the song in her head or something. Since we're on Harley, let's just talk about her outfit really quick. During the first part of the movie, when she watches all of her friends' souls leave their body, her outfit looks extremely similar to that of Harley's from Arkham City, and if I'm not mistaken, that could be the first time that a DC movie has directly referenced one of their video game counterparts. Maybe that means Jason Todd in a completely different suit for no reason. Who knows? When we're first introduced to King Shark, it's an inversion of one of his most iconic panels in the comics, where he's reading the Essential Rumi, which is a collection of poetry to establish that he has a strong sense of intelligence. In the Suicide Squad, they went in a different direction, but the book that he's reading, The Varieties of Religious Experiences, looks at the individual's response to religion outside of the religious system itself, and given how Nanaue is the son of the shark god, maybe he's smarter than he's letting on. With Ratcatcher 2 having such a great relationship with the rodent population, there was bound to be some famous rat mentioned, and for this one, they went with Ratatouille, which is admittedly a pretty hard reference to miss. But another Ratatouille reference comes from the fact that the voice actor for Sebastian, the only named rat in the movie, D. Bradley Baker, actually did some voice work in the video game tie-in for Ratatouille. Might need to just do a 6 degrees of Ratatouille just to see what happens. Finally, let's end with one of the end credit scenes. I'm not talking about the first one because it features something unholy, so let's talk about how the end credit scene with Peacemaker actually surviving sets up him potentially working for Checkmate. In the comics, Checkmate is an independent team or offshoot of Task Force X. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but it's more based in spy work and espionage. Given how aggressive and gung-ho Peacemaker was in this movie, if they do decide to fold Checkmate in with his show debuting next year, they might have to tone that down a bit.
Hey kids, you see that new Marvel movie called The Eternals? Well, here's some things you might have missed, maybe, I don't know you. Alright, let's start with that post-credits scene you should be kind of trained to wait for, like the good MCU lab rat that you are. This is the way of the human sphere, after all. In the final post-credits scene, we're shown Dane, totally not Jon Snow Whitman, opening up an old box to reveal a creepy sword. That sword is, of course, the Ebony Blade, which, if you read the comics, is the weapon used by the Black Knight, who, of course, is Dane Whitman's alter ego in said comics. Oh man, I'm way too... Oh my gosh, why is my head cut off? Gotta do this? Do I gotta do this? Oh boy. There we go, rookie mistake. You know, professionals actually have their monitor right above the camera so that they can see what they're doing, but not me. Not me. Earlier in the film, one of the Eternals... crap, I honestly don't remember. I don't remember which one it was. There's so many of them. Anyway, one of them, Immortal Scamps, picks up a sword in the domo late in the film and refers to it as the Ebony Blade, only for another one of our litany of heroes to, I guess, correct that to Excalibur, which is a common reference point in the comics for, again, the ebony blade, which also dates back to Arthurian legend. Now back to that post-credits Black Knight tease, you probably noticed that voice that asks whether Dane is ready for whatever tomfoolery he's about to get into. Lucky me, I wrote this script the night I saw the movie, and of course this part's all over the news now, so surprise, it's Mahershala Ali, who of course was cast ages ago as Blade. Gotta say, the fearsome vampire hunter getting his first sort of introduction in the Eternals was not on my bingo card.
Is your blood on fire?
Of course, maybe I shouldn't have been all that surprised. After all, this is also the first film in the MCU, as far as I can recall, that directly references vampires. It's a bit of a cheeky way, but Kingo does mention that his valet tried to kill him in the past because he thought the never-aging Bollywood superstar was some kind of vampire. Which I, by the way, would love to think is a reference to my first ever Bollywood experience, Band Darwaza, which I'm probably mispronouncing actually now I'm thinking about it. Anyway, those Ramsey brothers, they sure can direct a lean, mean vampire musical, I tell you what. Oh, one other thing about Dane and his, 10 minutes of screen time. That family crest you see on that there ring that Cersei gives to Mr. Whitman is the in-comics symbol adorning the Black Knight. Not sure how many ways I can say Dane is the Black Knight, and this is a reference to that, but here we are. Our other sexy stinger comes in the form of the introduction of Harry Styles as Star Fox, aka Eros. I wish I had some footage to show you there, but theatrical release, yada yada yada. In the comics, Star Fox... Help me! Damn it, Slippy, get off my back! In the comics, Eros is the brother of Thanos, whom he grew up with on the planet Titan. Eros, his sidekick, I guess, / valet / horrifying CGI monstrosity, Pip the Troll, also shows up in that mid-credits scene. Pip is best known as a compatriot of Adam Warlock's, who of course was hinted at in the post-credits scene in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. He also, thanks to a little magical plot junk, can teleport and has the ability to locate any individual, which of course makes sense of Star Fox's claim of being able to find the missing Eternals. He's voiced by Patton Oswalt, who of course was also previously attached to the MCU through his work on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where he played everyone's favorite clones, the Koenig brothers. And here's one you definitely missed if you pay zero attention to the credits. I know I was surprised to see his name after months of rumors that guest star... star of the guest? Dan Stevens would be the voice of the villainous deviant Crow. Welp, actually that role went to Pennywise himself, Bill Skarsgård. And Dan Stevens is nowhere to be seen in Eternals, which on the one hand, cool to hear Skarsgård, but on the other hand, man, I really wish I could tell him the final product. Now, lots of eagle-eyed viewers have pointed this out, but for those in the back, yes, Cersei actor Gemma Chan has been in the MCU before, and not all that long ago. She played the villainous Minerva in 2019's Captain Marvel. I guess since she was blue, they figured no one would, really care. Now, those in the know, when it comes to the comic side of things, shouldn't have been too surprised by Arishem being, a big old bad guy. Not only is he, obviously bad news, but in those comics, he's also literally called the Killer of Planets. By the by, if you could hear past all the epic post-processing, you might have found the voice of Arishem to be somewhat familiar. The Celestial is voiced by David Kaye, who's lent his voice to a massive number of projects over the years. He's the voice of Clank in the Ratchet & Clank video game franchise, he's General Hawk in G.I. Joe, and he even voiced Jarvis in various Marvel TV projects like Avengers Assemble, where he also voiced my personal fave, Baron Zemo, and those weird Heroes United CGI movie things. That's all just the tip of the iceberg, of course, but the point being, dude's got a pedigree. And in the Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z, he was Raccoon! And hey, if you thought Arishem's title in the old Eternals comic wasn't enough to judge him as, a super obvious antagonist, then Earth X is here to serve. This miniseries postulates that the potential for superhuman beings was implanted in the Earth by Celestials who wanted these superpowered dudes and dudettes to protect, you guessed it, the Celestial that Earth was impregnated with in the long, long ago, and which, once born, in this case, after feeding on our natural resources, would of course destroy the planet. Just, lots of bad news from them Celestials, that's what I'm saying. They're not good guys. There's also a lot of references to Neil Gaiman's run on the Eternals, including Sprite's obsession with becoming an adult. In fact, in the comic run, Sprite winds up being a major antagonist, and once all is said and done, he straight up just gets his neck snapped by the eternal Zurus. The idea of the Dreaming Celestial Tiamat is also a big part of this arc, so if you want to just get more I guess, out of your love of this film. If you loved it, go read Neil Gaiman's Eternals run. I'm sorry I spoiled it for you. Whoops. Speaking of Sprite, we get a lot of references to historical figures who were in turn just Eternals the whole time or affected by Eternals in some way. In the credits, we get a few, including an image suggesting Sprite aided in Houdini's magic act. We also earlier get a great comparison between Sprite and Tinkerbell, the idea being that Tinkerbell can't be with Peter Pan, much like how Sprite can't be with Icarus. And this seems like a fairly obvious direct nod to the comics, wherein we find out that Sprite was the inspiration for Peter Pan. That was a drum roll, by the way. Another comic reference that's a bit more direct is the pose Icarus strikes after breaking free of his Phastos-created bonds during the final battle. The same pose and eye laser sexiness found on the cover of Eternals #6. You may also have noticed in the opening crawl a reference to the 6 singularities. If you didn't manage to put 2 and 2 together, I guess 3 and 3, whatever, they were a reference to the Infinity Stones.
There were 6 singularities.
Oh, and you know how Icarus flies into the sun at the end, like some sort of superpowered dork who just got turned down for prom? Well, that was shoehorned into the movie because, hey, he's Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. They literally mention this in the movie. Because, you know, Greek mythology, baby. Come on. Now, Druig is an interesting change of sorts for the Eternals. Usually he's the one to betray or double-cross his teammates, but of course, this being an MCU movie, something like that just has to be turned on its head.
I wouldn't go in there for 20 minutes.
But that didn't stop the filmmakers from giving him a little villainous edge. This is another one that I doubt you missed it, but I kind of just wanted to talk about it. Wasn't it fascinating how he just kind of has a cult? Seriously, the group meets in a freaking church in the middle of a commune in which Druig has complete control over all those within, and he comes mighty close to forcing them to sacrifice their lives before sending them to the river to escape. Like, I'm shocked they weren't all just like drinking Flavor Aid or something. The Eternals are also linked heavily to Babylon in the comics, so it's no wonder they settle there for a bit in the film. Thena's romantic ties to Crow, something teased in the trailer, but of course unconsummated in the film, began in the Herod Factor, wherein the Eternals battled the Deviants over the city of Babylon. This was also the city ruled over by Gilgamesh, hence his place in mythology. It's also suggested in the film that, I guess Thanos was kinda right? It's explained that the Celestial needed the energy created by the full population of Earth, and if that population was cut in half, then the dreaming Celestial wouldn't have been born, or at least, you know, not at this particular moment in time. Yet another point for the Thanos did nothing wrong camp.
You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
In the trailer and the film, we also get the long-standing tradition of a glimpse at Cap's shield, in this case on board Kingo's private plane. I guess the dude's a fan of Cap and collects memorabilia. I wonder if he ever hung out with Coulson. Oh, and if you're not in the know when it comes to music, don't worry, neither am I, and I did have to look this one up in between haggling over Sammy Hagar tickets. After Kingo name drops the Korean band BTS at his studio, the next song we hear is, of course, Friends by BTS. The Domo, the ship used by the Eternals, is based somewhat on the comics, where Domo is actually, well, this guy. Domo's job is essentially to handle the affairs of other Eternals in Olympia, which is a real place and not a phony construct like in the film. He's essentially an invulnerable, undying secretary. Another minor comic book reference comes in the form of Thena's Madwiri, which is basically eternal Alzheimer's and is a pretty messed up, scary concept. The idea is that while the Eternals have immortal, borderline impervious to harm bodies, their minds are essentially just those of normal humans. As you can imagine, a few millennia can have a strong effect on one's mental well-being, as Cersei found out in Avengers number 361. This might just be me stretching for links to other properties, but did y'all notice that the way Sprite is communicating with ancient civilizations and creating myths and legends is a whole lot like how C-3PO tells stories to the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi? Just saying. There's also a character reading a Star Wars book at one point, and it is Disney, so like, I don't know, synergy?
Oh, is there a big battle going on? I couldn't tell. Stop calling me!
Okay, I think I'm done. There were a bunch of references in Eternals, but not a whole lot in the way of things you might have missed, unless you're somehow blind to shots of characters in silhouette in front of the setting sun, in which case, oh boy, you missed a lot.